15 years ago, a young man in Franklin, Tennessee, vanished in the middle of the night, disappearing without a trace, leaving his family plunged into despair, and the entire town haunted by an unnamed unease. Authorities quickly focused suspicion on the last woman seen with him, who also vanished from the community's sight shortly afterward. But with no body found, and too few clues to proceed, the investigation ultimately stalled. Yet, through all those years, Evan's parents never once gave up hope, clinging to the slim chance that their son was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. Then one day, when a forester noticed something unusual in a long-forgotten stretch of woods, a crucial detail emerged, one that everyone had overlooked for 11 years, and it would change the entire case in a way no one could have imagined. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe. The night of October 12, 2010, in Franklin, Tennessee began with the characteristic chill of early fall, wind threading through the tree lines along Culverton Drive, the roadway dimly lit under sparse yellow streetlights, and the backyards of the apartments in the Cool Springs complex, sunk in a silence so deep that even a door softly closing would tear through the atmosphere. Around 9 p.m., the lights from Evan Ridley's apartment were still on, casting a faint golden strip across the dew-wet grass. Inside, Evan, 29 years old, a young lawyer practicing in Nashville, was talking with Madison Carter, his 21-year-old girlfriend, with whom he'd had an unpredictable on-and-off relationship for months. Neighbors in the adjacent apartment later recalled hearing raised voices, not loud, but sharp and urgent, a kind of contained argument rather than an explosive one. There was no sound of furniture crashing, no loud impacts, just the rhythm of their voices intertwining and then fading, right before a dry click sounded from the back door. The light over the backyard flicked off immediately after, leaving the misty wall of woods behind the complex resting in thick darkness. Evan usually arrived at his Nashville office early, rarely absent without notice, but the next morning, his desk was empty. Colleagues received no email, saw no sign of his car leaving the parking lot, and heard nothing from him over the internal system. By nearly noon, with calls and texts going unanswered, the family began to truly worry. Evan's mother drove from Brentwood to Franklin, hoping to find her son oversleeping or out early without his phone. But Evan's apartment stood silent, like a solid block of darkness amid the harsh midday sun. No sound, no sign of movement, no response despite her calling his name multiple times. A quiet but sharp unease crept into every breath. The wind lightly rustled dry leaves under the eaves, a sound ordinarily comforting but unbearably unsettling in this suffocating context. There were no signs Evan had just left, no note left behind, no clue explaining the sudden absence. After a few minutes standing bewildered at the door, then a few more suppressing hope that it might suddenly open, Evan's mother knew this had crossed the line of ordinary delay. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling slightly, despite the weather not being that cold, and dialed 911. When the operator answered, her voice broke in just the first two sentences. "My son, Evan Ridley, is missing. We haven't been able to reach him since last night." Evan's mother's call was transferred to the Franklin Police Department dispatch at 7:18 a.m., and within 3 minutes, the event code was entered into the CAD system under the classification Missing Adult, Suspicious, a level applied to cases of adults disappearing under unusual circumstances that can't immediately be explained as voluntary departure. The nearest patrol unit was dispatched to the Cool Springs apartment complex where Evan lived. As the patrol car turned onto Culverton Drive, the roadway still bore traces of dampness from the night before, and the atmosphere was so quiet that the engine noise echoed too loudly. The two officers stepped out, briefly spoke with Evan's mother and gathering family on the front porch, then conducted an initial perimeter observation per standard procedure. The front door was securely closed, with no signs of prying or hinge damage, windows intact, curtains in their usual position. They walked along the narrow path to the underground garage and noted Evan's car, a silver gray sedan, still parked in its familiar spot. No tire marks indicating departure, no fresh mud, no changes suggesting the car had been used overnight. One officer paused for a few seconds, scanning the empty parking area, then bent down to check the license plate and note it in his log, while the other continued questioning the family. Last conversation with Evan at what time, any texts or calls before losing contact, and whether he had a habit of leaving without notice. All answers pointed to the same conclusion: Evan didn't disappear like someone avoiding responsibilities. The officer directly called Evan's law office in Nashville. The call was transferred to reception, then the administrative assistant. Both confirmed Evan was not present that morning and had not reported off. A colleague noted Evan usually arrived by 7:45 a.m., very rarely late. His failure to show up, call, or email was completely out of character for years. In the 3 minutes of silence that followed, the group stood in the courtyard leading to the garage, hearing only the wind rustling through the oak trees along the fence. The two officers exchanged a glance, and the shift supervisor quietly said to the other, "This doesn't add up. No signs of leaving, car still here out of contact for over 10 hours. He reopened the MDT in the car, entered a situation update, and escalated the internal alert level. There was no legal basis yet to treat it as a crime, but all signs pointed to one thing: something was wrong with Evan Ridley's absence. The lead officer asked the family about any possible explanations: a sudden trip, a personal meeting, someone Evan might have wanted to see the previous evening. Evan's mother immediately mentioned the Madison Carter, his on-off girlfriend. That was the first time the name came up that morning. The officer noted the information, marking last person in contact, then continued a brief sweep of the surrounding area to ensure no signs of impact, fall, or unusual movement in the yard and walkways. Nothing. Everything was too clean, too quiet, too intact, as if no one had stepped out that door the night before. Upon completing the initial documentation, the responding officer informed the family that a formal missing person report would be filed, the investigative unit would take over, and Franklin PD would open the case as suspicious missing until evidence suggested otherwise. No one used the word danger, no one mentioned crime, but the excessive caution in the officer's tone and notes made the family understand their fears were no longer imaginary. Evan Ridley wasn't just not answering his phone, he had vanished. About 30 minutes after completing the initial documentation at Evan's home, the shift supervisor returned to the patrol car and called the phone number for Madison Carter provided by Evan's mother. The call connected slowly, the ringtone echoing steadily in the morning dew cabin. When a young woman's voice answered on the other end, it sounded neither clearly sad nor sleepy, just dazed, like someone yanked from a midpoint between confusion and defensiveness. The officer introduced himself, his unit, then explained that Evan Ridley's family had reported him missing, and Madison was noted as the last person to see him the previous night. There was a very brief pause, not long enough to call hesitation but enough to sense a flash of calculation, before Madison spoke in a higher pitch. "Missing? You mean, he's not home?" The officer kept a neutral tone, repeating that Evan hadn't gone to work in Nashville, the family couldn't reach him, and they needed to confirm the last time she saw him. On the other end, Madison's words came faster, more numerous, spilling like from a tilted cup. She said she arrived at Evan's around 8 p.m., just to talk for a bit, that they didn't really argue, just disagreed, that Evan wanted to be alone, and she left his place around, probably 9 or 9:10. The officer asked for specifics, exactly what time at 8, how long the visit lasted, whether Evan said what he planned to do after she left. Madison replied she wasn't watching the clock, that she thought so because it was fully dark outside by then. When asked if Evan left the apartment at the same time as her or stayed inside, Madison said he went out the back door to get something and told her to go ahead. The officer noted every statement, every time frame, every vague interval, approximate times, approximate behaviors, Evan's words not clearly quoted. When he tried to verify the direction Madison took after leaving Evans, she said she drove straight toward Brentwood. Then when asked which route she adjusted, "No, probably turned onto Mallory Lane, because I remember stopping at a gas station, or maybe the day before, I'm not sure." Each fragment connected into a chain where every link carried the murky hue of memory mixed with excessive uncertainty. The officer gently returned to the core, the last moment Madison saw Evan. She insisted he was completely fine, that he just needed space, and she figured Evan might walk a few laps around the complex to cool off after their talk. When asked if Evan had done that after previous arguments, Madison quickly said sometimes he would walk, then no, he always stayed inside, then corrected, probably just once in Knoxville over Thanksgiving. Each revision made her voice tighter, but not from sadness, from having to pivot the story too hastily. The officer, familiar with this shifting testimony style, fully noted it under inconsistencies. He also observed that Madison kept interjecting questions amid her answers about whether Evan left any messages, said anything to the family, as if trying to glean from the officer's tone a scrap of information to steer her own narrative. When directly asked if she felt worried last night, Madison said she thought Evan just needed time alone, that he was often like that, and she didn't think his not answering calls was unusual, because he liked silence when he didn't want to be bothered. Her voice suddenly dipped half a beat before rising to, "How could I know he would go missing?" A sentence grammatically correct, but its echo carried more defensiveness than concern. The officer ended the call after nearly 10 minutes, thanked Madison for the information, and said they'd follow up if needed. When he hung up, no conclusions were drawn, no accusations implied. But what he logged was a level of cooperation that was adequate. Talkative but not fully responsive, willing to narrate, but short on precise timestamps, and the entire timeline just rough sketches lacking anchors. It wasn't evidence of crime, but certainly not the standard statement from the last person to see a man now missing for nearly 12 hours. As the two officers finished the call with Madison Carter, Evan's mother asked them to check inside the house, her voice trembling but resolute, like someone who had just realized all harmless explanations had been dismissed after hours without word from her son. This consent was sufficient for the patrol team to conduct the first preliminary search, per procedure for adults missing under unusual circumstances. The door opened with a light click, no resistance from lock or hinges, as if the apartment itself had been waiting for someone to enter since the previous night ended. Inside, the air held the characteristic stillness of an unoccupied space, cold, even, and devoid of movement. Light from the windows cast a pale strip across the living room floor, where the sofa, coffee table, and bookshelves remained exactly in place. The two officers moved slowly, eyes capturing every detail per professional habit, items not displaced, chairs upright, no paper or object suspiciously out of order. No signs of a struggle, no scratches, no fallen items, no drag or impact marks. The adjacent kitchen was tidy, dishes dried and stacked from before, kitchen light off, dish towel hung properly, refrigerator closed tightly, nothing spilled or scattered inside. One officer opened the cleaning supply closet, finding nothing pulled out hastily, everything left as is, like a home whose owner had stepped away for minutes, not over 10 hours, as the family feared. They proceeded down the hallway to the bedroom. The room was bright from the large window overlooking the parking lot, bed neatly made with blankets smooth, pillows aligned, bedside lamp off. No clothes strewn or drawers unusually open. One officer bent close to the bed edge, checking the carpet for drag marks or strange footprints, but seeing only evenly compressed fibers from regular use. The adjacent bathroom was clean, towels hung neatly, toothpaste, toothbrush, razor all in place, sink dry, mirror free of hand smudges or hasty wipes. The entire home resembled a meticulously arranged apartment, rather than a space someone fled mid-argument. The second officer checked the back door, confirming no signs of forcing or prying. Glass intact, door edge straight, hinges unscratched. The biggest anomaly wasn't messiness but perfection, as if everything froze at a normal moment, while the owner vanished in a completely abnormal way. Returning to the living room for a final sweep, one officer voiced what both had avoided: If Evan left voluntarily, why no signs of preparation? And even if due to an argument, why no lingering signs of conflict? No coat grabbed hastily, nothing disturbed, no heavy touch marks on surfaces. All their notes pointed the same way. No forced entry, no struggle, no packing by Evan, but also no signs of prepared departure. It was an inexplicable void. After documenting the apartment's full state, the lead officer spoke to the family at the entrance, voice slow but firm. Nothing immediately indicates violence, but also nothing suggests Evan left voluntarily. He updated the system and requested a formal missing person investigation, noting circumstances unexplained, a status between suspicion extremes, enough to launch an investigation, but not yet classify as crime. As they stepped out and closed the door, both officers understood what they saw didn't reduce concern for Evan Ridley's safety. It only made his disappearance stranger and harder to explain. The home was too quiet, too intact, too silent to be the starting point of an absence lasting many hours, and that very fact forced Franklin PD to escalate to a formal investigation. About an hour after completing the preliminary inspection of Evan's apartment and officially opening the missing person investigation file, the two assigned officers contacted Madison Carter again to conduct her first full interview. She was invited to the Franklin PD late that morning, and as she entered the interview room, Madison carried a restlessness that an outsider might easily mistake for anxiety. But in the eyes of investigators, accustomed to reading body language, that restlessness leaned more toward someone trying to prepare their story than someone genuinely confused about losing contact with their boyfriend. She sat down in the metal chair, crossed her arms in her lap, then released them, adjusted her jacket strap, then pulled her hair to one side, her eyes moving constantly, as if trying to decide where to start. When asked the last time she saw Evan and under what circumstances, Madison launched into her story almost immediately, as if she had been thinking about it all night, but still wanted to fine-tune each sentence as she spoke it. "I got to his place around 8, maybe a little later," Madison began. But when the officer asked for more specificity, 8, what minutes? Before or after dark, she corrected, probably 8:20 or 25. "I remember it was just starting to get colder outside, wind blowing hard through the backyard. I think so." The officer took notes, pointing out that the previous evening had been cold, but the wind hadn't picked up strongly before 9 p.m. To test the accuracy of her account, Madison paused briefly, then switched to maybe 8:30, because when I went into his place the backyard light was still on. This statement made the officer look up immediately, not because it was right or wrong, but because it was a very specific detail while all the other timelines she had given were just approximations. When asked what they talked about, Madison said Evan seemed tired, like he wanted to be alone, then shifted entirely to describing Evan's temperament when stressed, mixing in a few comments about herself and past times they had disagreed. That behavior quickly pulled the story off track, forcing the officer to remind her to stick to the events of that evening. When asked how long the conversation lasted, Madison said about an hour or more, then in the next sentence said, maybe not even 40 minutes. And when asked to describe the time she left the apartment, she said probably around 9 o'clock, a little before. The officer asked her to confirm if she arrived at 8:20, 8:30, and left just before 9, the conversation would have lasted under 40 minutes, not an hour or more as she had just said. Madison looked down at the table for a few seconds, then replied, I really didn't check the time, I just remember everything was really tense, and I didn't want to stay long. Another officer in the room wrote in his notebook, time contradiction #1. When the question shifted to Evan's actions after Madison left, she said Evan had walked toward the back door, saying he needed to step outside for a bit to get some air. But when the officer asked if Evan walked her to the front door, Madison answered, no, he went around through the kitchen and said he'd go out back for a while. I just went straight out the front door and left. The officer noted this, then asked if Evan took a jacket, shoes, or anything with him when he went outside for air. Madison gave a faint smile and said, he never took anything, it was just to get some air. This answer wasn't literally wrong, but it made no sense given the weather in Franklin the previous evening. Temperatures had dropped low, it was windy. A grown man going out back at 9 p.m. to get air would need a warm coat, or at least take his phone or keys if he intended to leave the property. Madison seemed unaware of this inconsistency as she described it. Another contradiction emerged. When the officer asked her to describe the direction she observed Evan moving, Madison said she heard him walking toward the back of the house. Then in the next sentence said she left first, so I didn't hear anything, and immediately after corrected that she still heard the back door close. When the officer pressed this detail and asked Madison to clarify whether she heard the door or not, she changed her tone. I think I did, but maybe I imagined it because I was really stressed. This was noted under contradiction #2 sound, direction. Police continued by asking which way Madison left the apartment, what route she drove, and whether she noticed anything unusual. Madison said she drove straight back to Brentwood, but when asked if she saw any strange vehicles or people near the complex, she described a black car parked near the exit, but when the officer asked for a license plate or make, she said she couldn't see clearly. This detail appeared suddenly, like a piece added to create another investigative lead, but with no accompanying information that could be verified. When the officer mentioned that the Cool Springs area has cameras at many gas stations and parking lots, Madison briefly lost her composure and said quickly, "Maybe I mixed it up with another night. Last night, I really wasn't paying attention." That was contradiction #3. Throughout the interview, Madison frequently inserted unrelated comments, remarks about the weather, stories about trips they took to Knoxville. Sometimes shifting to talk about how Evan kept his emotions inside, then returning to the main question, as if afraid of being judged for going off topic too long. That behavior caused her narrative to break constantly, forcing the investigators to repeatedly pull the story back to the timeline. One notable moment was when the officer asked if Madison felt worried when leaving Evan's place that night. Instead of answering directly, she said, "I didn't think he would disappear. He just needed space." Then, as if afraid that wasn't convincing enough, she added, "I still thought he'd call me this morning. I waited." The officer looked straight at her, but he didn't call. Madison bit her lip, her hands clasping then releasing, her eyes darting quickly as if searching for another answer, but not forming it in time. "No, but I didn't know it would turn out like this." The interview ended, after more than 40 minutes, with no emotional outburst, no confession, no details strong enough to shift the investigation's direction, but the list of contradictions had grown considerably, arrival time versus departure time. Whether Evan went out back, whether Madison heard the door close, the direction Evan left, Evan's behavior of going outside for air without taking anything in cold weather. As Madison left the room, one officer flipped back through his notebook and said quietly to his colleague, "If Evan really left the house last night, this statement doesn't add up." That comment was recorded in the report, marking the Franklin PD's initial conclusion. Madison Carter's account did not fit any reasonable scenario of Evan Ridley voluntarily leaving his apartment on the night of October 12th. After the Madison interview ended, and she left the Franklin PD headquarters, the investigation team returned to Evan's apartment to conduct the formal evidence collection step under the protocol for a suspicious missing person case. If the earlier preliminary check had only aimed to record the overall state of the apartment, this return visit required a different level of thoroughness. Every object, every surface, every tiniest trace had to be examined, as potentially holding part of the story that Madison's statement could not clarify. The apartment still retained the quiet from that morning, but under the investigators' eyes, that quiet was no longer neutral. It became the background for a systematic examination carried out layer by layer, like peeling an onion, looking for anything that didn't match the story of Evan voluntarily leaving the house as Madison described. The first step in the evidence collection procedure was to identify essential items a normal person would take when leaving home, especially after an argument or going out at night in cold weather. So when the lead officer opened the small cabinet by the door and saw Evan's wallet sitting neatly inside, ID, bank cards, and some cash still intact in the drawer, they immediately logged it as evidence. An adult not taking their wallet when leaving home at night is unusual, but someone missing for many hours with their wallet still at home is far more unusual. Next, Evan's phone was found on the kitchen counter, clean, screen black, no signs of being dropped or impacted. His phone was a 2010-era model without GPS capability, but the fact it was left at home in this situation was still significant. It was something rarely left behind when going out, especially alone in cold weather late at night. An officer picked up the phone using nitrile gloves, noted its position, orientation, and photographed it per protocol. Just the fact that both wallet and phone were home already raised major questions about the hypothesis that Evan voluntarily left the apartment to get some air or walk around the area. Right next to the shoe rack, a pair of gray athletic shoes Evan owned were placed neatly, soles showing no fresh wet dirt. These were the shoes Evan typically used for evening walks, as confirmed by his mother, but that night they remained in place, indicating their owner did not leave the house the usual way. No other pair of shoes was noted missing, and there were no slipper marks or unfamiliar sole prints leaving the apartment. One officer knelt to check the area around the shoe rack and discovered something small but important, not an intact object, but a very fine patch of dirt right at the edge of the back door. Lightly scattered by wind, but still clear enough to see, it didn't belong on the regular floor surface. It lingered as tiny crumbs, like soil that had clung to shoes from outside and fallen off when someone stepped in or when the door was opened. What made it notable wasn't the quantity, there was very little, but its exact position at the threshold between inside and outside. The investigation team logged this discovery, photographed the scene, and collected the sample in an evidence bag. Though they couldn't conclude immediately that this dirt was related to Evan's disappearance, per protocol, any foreign material near the back door, in this context, could have inferential value regarding direction of movement or when the door was opened. Moving to the living room area, the digital technician approached the laptop on the table next to the sofa. The machine was completely powered off, not in sleep mode, and when turned on it required a full boot. An officer checked the activity history and noted the last use timestamp was 9:08 p.m. on October 12th. No applications ran after that time, no further keystrokes, no background tasks. This aligned with Evan using the machine and abandoning it mid-session, but did not align with the idea that he left the house prepared. If he planned to step out for air or a walk, why leave the laptop on and shut it down abruptly instead of closing the lid or saving work? A person with normal habits rarely abandons a computer like that unless interrupted. When an officer gently checked around the laptop area, they noted nothing displaced, no yanked cords, no obvious external impact. The computer stopping at 9:08 p.m. could be innocuous, but it could also be a critical timestamp, a hard stop in the night's events. The final notable observation in this evidence collection round concerned the back door. Though the earlier team had checked for forced entry, they hadn't documented the interior frame details. This time, they closely examined the door edge, hinges, and floor-adjacent area. No signs of heavy force from inside or out, no scratches, no warping. This ruled out a violent struggle causing physical breakage, but highlighted the paradox. Evan could not have left via the back door without leaving traces, even just deeper footprints. But he also could not vanish without exiting the front door, where no one saw him leave. One officer underlined a note: no forced entry, no forced exit. When compiling everything gathered in nearly an hour of examination, the Franklin PD concluded that Evan Ridley's disappearance did not fit any of the common scenarios for an adult voluntarily leaving home. Wallet, phone, keys all left behind, walking shoes unused, laptop shut down mid-use, back door showing no signs of hurried opening, yet foreign dirt appearing near the threshold. The contradictions among these elements led the team to add a short but weighty line to the report that would shift the case direction. Indicators inconsistent with voluntary departure. No one said it out loud, but they all recognized the same thing. From the moment they re-entered the apartment, they were no longer looking for signs of a man who walked away on his own. They were looking for traces of something that happened without leaving any explanation. Once evidence collection in the apartment was complete, the investigation team moved to the next step in the protocol, analyzing Evan's communication data in the period leading up to the disappearance. Since Evan's phone had been found in the home and was fully functional, officers could directly access the call log and messages, an important but limited source given 2010 technology, when smartphones weren't widespread and there was no built-in real-time GPS tracking. The only location-related data available was cell tower connection information for calls or texts, but even that was coarse, low accuracy, and couldn't show movement paths. The analysis session began by reviewing the call log from 5 p.m. to midnight on October 12. Between 7:05 p.m. and 8:21 p.m., Evan received only one call from the law office where he worked, informing him of a document needing urgent signature the next morning. The call lasted 48 seconds, his voice normal with no signs of stress according to the colleague contacted later. From 8:21 p.m. onward, the communication log shifted to a series of texts with Madison. The first message from Evan to her simply read, "At home. Wait a bit." The next message from Madison arrived at 8:29 p.m. "I'm on my way, we need to talk." Evan did not reply to this one. An officer reread that short line and glanced at his colleague. It was an ordinary message, but in the current context, any shift in their communication rhythm could carry meaning. The next message in Evan's phone arrived at 8:46 p.m., also from Madison. "Where are you?" But Evan did not respond. This aligned with Madison's statement that she arrived and they talked in person. However, the message history showed no further exchanges after the time she said they met at the apartment. That wasn't unusual. If two people are together, they don't need to text. But the team still noted it because it highlighted one thing: from 8:21 p.m. onward, all of Evan's communication stopped completely. No outgoing calls, no replies, no other recorded activity. One officer emphasized this point. For an average person, going a few evening hours without contact isn't rare. But for someone who then completely vanishes, it becomes significant. After reviewing message content, the team moved to cell tower data analysis. All of Evan's phone connections on the night of October 12 registered to the Franklin West Tower, the tower covering the area around his apartment, with a radius of 1.5 to 3 miles, depending on network load. This showed his phone never left the coverage area, even after 9 p.m. When Madison said Evan went outside for air and might walk for a bit. If Evan really left the apartment and walked in some direction, the phone could still connect to the same tower, so the data wasn't conclusive proof he stayed home. But considered in context, phone not taken, wallet not taken, shoes unused, and Madison saying he left, the signal staying locked to one tower became more noteworthy. One officer reminded the group that 2010 technology couldn't determine whether a device moved or stayed stationary inside. The only certainty was that the phone never connected to nearby towers like Franklin East or Cool Springs South, meaning it didn't leave the immediate apartment vicinity. This matched the physical evidence. The phone was found at home. When the team cross-referenced the last message timestamp with the laptop shutdown time, they noticed a roughly 20-minute gap with no communication activity. This gap fell right between the period Madison described as their conversation becoming tense and the time she left, just before 9. One officer wrote in his notebook, "No phone activity after Madison arrived." On the other hand, Madison's message history, provided during the interview, showed she texted Evan 3 times after 9 p.m., 9:12 p.m., 9:27 p.m., and 10:01 p.m., all unanswered. When investigators asked why she texted if she left around 9, Madison explained she thought he needed space, but still wanted to check if he was okay. Meanwhile, Evan's phone data showed no read receipts, of course, since the phone wasn't opened after his disappearance. The lead investigator noted cautiously that phone data couldn't prove anything definitively, but it clearly showed one thing: All of Evan's activity stopped abruptly right before or during the time he met with Madison. Even the communication gap after 8:21 p.m., before Madison's later urgent messages, made the explanation that Evan left to get some air harder to square with reality. Someone going out for a walk usually takes their phone. Someone under stress might not call anyone, but they wouldn't leave both wallet and phone if planning to be gone more than 5 minutes. At the end of the analysis session, the team archived all extracted phone data into the missing person file. Nothing in those numbers and lines directly stated what happened, but every gap in the call history, every minute of silence, and every detail inconsistent with Madison's account made the officers understand they could no longer treat Evan's disappearance as a simple voluntary departure. Every sign, though scattered, pointed in the same direction. Evan Ridley's trail ended inside his own apartment on the evening of October 12th. And from that minute onward, no data showed he ever stepped beyond that threshold again. Immediately after completing the analysis of Evan's phone data, the investigation team moved to the next step, reconstructing a detailed timeline from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. on October 12th. Combining Madison's statements, information from Evan's family, text message, and call data, and time-confirmed events from external sources. The goal of this step was not to find the final answer, but to identify mismatched time periods, logical gaps that often reveal more than any statement. The timeline begins at 7:05 p.m., when Evan received a call from the office, lasting less than a minute. This is the last point in the day that can be confirmed as him intentionally interacting with the outside world, unrelated to Madison. After this call, there is no evidence that he contacted anyone else. From 7:05 p.m. to 8:21 p.m., Evan's phone was inactive. This is a nearly absolute silence in the data, but the family confirmed that his habit was to go home, have a light snack, and review documents. So no communication during this period is normal. The key point starts at 8:21 p.m., when Evan sent the message, "At home." Wait a bit, this was the last message he sent that night. Madison stated in her testimony that she arrived at Evan's apartment around 8:20 or 8:30. The 8:21 p.m. message aligns with the time frame she described, but combined with her statement that she was on the way over, investigators noted, this message is likely a direct response to her prior notification of intending to visit him. This supports the time frame of meeting between 8:25 and 8:35 p.m., a reasonable window. However, right after that, the timeline begins to have issues. At 8:29 p.m., Madison texted, "I'm on my way. We need to talk." According to her statement, this was when she was almost at the door or passing through the Cool Springs area. But if she was already very close, why did the next message come at 8:46 p.m., asking, "Where are you?" implying that she was not with him, not speaking to him in person, and had not met him as described. The 17-minute gap between these two messages blurs the timeline. Either Madison did not arrive at 8:20 as she said, or she arrived and left and returned, or she was adjusting the timing to make the story consistent. This is the first contradiction. From 8:46 p.m. onward, Evan's phone data is completely silent. Madison stated during interrogation that when she arrived, Evan seemed irritable, tired, and they had a conversation lasting about an hour or 40 minutes. Investigators constructed an average timeline. If she arrived at 8:30 p.m., a 40-minute conversation means she left around 9:10 p.m. But in her statements, Madison gave two different versions, one that she left around 9 o'clock sharp, another close to 9:10. The key lies in when Evan's laptop stopped activity, 9:08 p.m. The investigation team noted the timeline as follows. 9:08 p.m. Laptop ceases activity. If the conversation occurred before this point, it would have to end earlier. If after, Evan would still be using the laptop, but Madison described them just talking in the living room, with no one touching the computer. This makes the 9:08 p.m. mark central. Something happened that caused the laptop to shut off abruptly. And this does not match any version of events Madison provided. This is the second contradiction. After identifying these two major discrepancies, The investigation team moved to the statements about leaving the house. Madison said Evan went out the back door to get some air, while she left through the front door. But the timeline shows that from 9:12 p.m. onward, Madison sent Evan 3 messages asking where he was and if he was okay. This only makes sense if they were no longer in the same space after she left. However, if Madison left around 9 o'clock, the 9:12 p.m. message is reasonable. The inconsistency lies in the detail, she said Evan got some air in the backyard for a few minutes and then probably went for a walk, but there was no activity from Evan after 8:21 p.m. No opening the phone, no sending messages, no responding to Madison. A person stepping out to the backyard to get air would have no reason to immediately cut off all contact, shut down the laptop a few minutes earlier, and not take the phone. Additionally, if Evan went for a walk in the area, his phone could still ping a nearby cell tower if he moved far enough. But that did not happen. The phone remained stationary in the Franklin West coverage area until the next morning. This directly contradicts him leaving the house, as per Madison's account. This is the third contradiction. The provisional timeline was constructed as follows: 7:05 p.m. Evan receives office call. 7:05. 8:21 p.m. No communication activity. Evan likely at home. 8:21 p.m. Evan sends final message. 8:29 p.m. Madison texts, she is on the way. 8:35. 8:46 p.m. No activity from Evan. Madison's statement does not match messages. 8:46 p.m. Madison texts, where are you? 9:10. 9:12 p.m. Madison leaves apartment per statement begins texting Evan. 9:12. 10:01 p.m. Madison sends multiple messages. Evan does not respond. 7 a.m. next day. Family discovers Evan did not arrive at office. When piecing these points into a continuous sequence, the picture that emerges is not a chaotic sequence of events, but an abnormally interrupted journey, an overly long silence from Evan's only message until the laptop shut down, a vague period where Madison describes a conversation, but the data does not support any action from Evan, and a subsequent completely empty stretch. All the investigation team has is an incomplete timeline, but one containing enough gaps to suspect that Madison's account is not an accurate picture of the night of October 12th. Instead of revealing the answer, the timeline exposes something clearer, illogical gaps in the sequence of actions that, according to Madison's statement, should have occurred, but according to the data, did not exist at all. After completing the timeline construction and noting 3 major contradictions in Madison's statements, the investigation team decided to take the next step in the elimination process, inspecting Madison Carter's personal vehicle. There was no direct evidence suggesting the car played a role in Evan's disappearance, but in an unusual missing person case, the vehicle of the last person to see the victim is always considered a critical link, even if only to rule out involvement. The inspection took place in the late afternoon of October 13th, in the parking lot behind the Franklin PD headquarters, where the slanting sunlight stretched long across the concrete and Madison's dark blue sedan was parked alone in the designated spot. She appeared calmer than that morning, agreeing to the vehicle inspection without requesting a lawyer, which was noted as cooperative but not guaranteeing the transparency of the results. 2 officers approached the car, opening the driver's side door first. The first smell they noticed was not the usual car interior odor, but a strong scent of fresh cleaning agent, a chemical clean smell that was almost unpleasant, as if the car had been thoroughly cleaned in an unusual manner. Cleaning a car is not strange, but for the vehicle of someone just involved in a tense meeting before her boyfriend went missing and cleaned overnight or early that day, it became a noteworthy detail. The first officer noted immediately strong cleaning agent odor present. When they looked down at the driver's floor mat, the second detail caught their attention even more: entirely new floor mats, black, without a single smudge or dust speck, with the rubber edges still stiff and clean as if never used. A small but hard-to-ignore sign was the manufacturer logo on the mat edge still having the matte sheen typical of a product just removed from packaging. New floor mats are not evidence of wrongdoing, but replacing both front ones uniformly, just hours after her boyfriend disappeared, was seen as behavior warranting questions, especially since Madison did not mention it during interrogation. One officer asked her while standing nearby, "When did you replace the floor mats?" Madison replied quickly, "Oh, I replaced them last week. The old ones were too dirty." The answer was direct, but it did not match the brand new condition of the products. The officer did not argue, just recorded it verbatim. They continued inspecting the passenger seat and glove compartment. No unusual items found, no loose papers, no plastic bags or abnormal belongings. Madison kept her car quite clean, which aligned with her self-description as organized. In the back seat, the floor mats were also new, but the right edge had a very slight indentation, as if a small object had been placed there briefly. But since there were no stains or accompanying objects, this detail was moved to undetermined value. One officer proceeded to inspect the trunk. The trunk was unusually clean. No suitcase, no blanket, no storage bins, nothing at all. The officer knelt down, shining a light into the side edges, but seeing only shiny plastic surfaces, dust-free. In missing person cases, the trunk often leaves small clues, dirt, leaf fragments, fabric fibers, or even just scratches on the cover panel. But Madison's car was clean like one from a car wash, inconsistent with the characteristics of a vehicle regularly driven between Franklin and Brentwood. However, cleanliness is not evidence. Excessive cleanliness is also not evidence unless linked to motive and timing was something they did not yet have. Upon completing the visual inspection, one officer opened the kit and took swabs for protein detection, a preliminary method to detect organic traces, often used to screen for blood even if wiped clean. They lightly swabbed the floor surfaces, door edges, seat seams, and trunk. All were negative, no color change reaction. This does not absolutely rule out, but indicates the car contained no obvious traces of violence. After 15 minutes of inspection, the only things they obtained were 3 details: fresh cleaning agent smell, recently replaced floor mats, and an unusually clean trunk. But none of these 3 points alone constituted probable cause to impound the vehicle. To impound, they needed one of 3 factors: traces linked to the missing person, organic evidence, or a strong enough contradiction between the statement and the vehicle's condition. Madison maintained that she didn't transport anyone, didn't go anywhere except back to Brentwood, and didn't replace anything except the new floor mats. The lack of specifics, but no direct falsehood, kept her statement in limbo between cooperation and evasion, not enough to push the case toward criminal, but enough to make investigators proceed cautiously. When they closed the trunk and returned the keys to Madison, one officer noted in the report, "Insufficient grounds to impound vehicle at this time." That short conclusion accurately reflected reality. Madison's car, like her statements, did not lead them to any answers, but did nothing to reduce the growing suspicion around the broken time points in the night Evan disappeared. After concluding there were insufficient grounds to impound Madison's vehicle, the investigation team moved to the next direction, reviewing surveillance systems around the Cool Springs area within a 2-mile radius of Evan's apartment. Although 2010 did not yet have dense urban camera networks, the area around Cool Springs was one of the highest commercial camera density spots in Williamson County. Gas stations, large grocery stores like Kroger, entrances to Cool Springs Galleria Mall, and parking lots, all had standard DVR tape recording systems of that era. These cameras did not provide high-resolution images, but were sufficient to identify vehicle movement, travel times, and sometimes the silhouette of people in vehicles. In missing person cases, the period from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. is the most critical to check, as it overlaps with Madison's statement that Evan went out the back of the house and with the laptop shutting down at 9:08 p.m. If Evan left the house in the described direction, cameras in the area should capture at least part of his movement or any related vehicle. However, the results were far from expectations. The first camera checked was at the Chevron gas station at the corner of Mallory Lane and Cool Springs Boulevard. The time period from 8:45 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. was slow scanned minute by minute, frame by frame. Traffic was sparse. Only 3 vehicles passed in half an hour, none matching Evans' license plate or vehicle shape. No man was seen walking on the sidewalk in front of the station, except for one jogger in reflective clothing at 9:12 p.m. Later verified as unrelated. The second camera was at Kroger, about 1.7 miles from Evans' apartment complex. The system here included 1 camera facing the storefront and 2 scanning the parking lot. The target time frame was reviewed 3 times, but no figure resembling Evan was recorded entering the door or moving in the parking area. Investigators paid special attention to the concrete walkway between the driveway and the fence leading to the adjacent apartment complex, where residents sometimes walked from home to the supermarket in the evening. However, that night was completely empty. No people, no jacket silhouettes, no unusual movement. That emptiness was noted not just as lacking Evan, but as lacking human movement overall, reinforcing the assessment that October 12th was a quieter night than usual. The third camera, the most important, was at the entrance to Cool Springs Galleria, facing the wide intersection and offering a broad view of much of the main road axis. The time frame to review was 8:50 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Around 9:04 p.m., when Evans' laptop shut down, a dark-colored sedan appeared in the frame. The vehicle was traveling from the direction of Evans' apartment toward the mall entrance at a steady speed with no signs of stopping. The team zoomed in to the maximum capability of the old system, but still could not clearly see the license plate, only the front outline and the silhouette of the person in the driver's seat. Despite the low image quality, the vehicle style had similarities to Madison's dark blue sedan. The investigators quickly discussed it could not be confirmed, but neither could it be ruled out as Madison's car. The most notable aspect was that this vehicle had only one person visible in the cabin. Gender or age could not be determined from the grainy frame, but the upright posture and dark hair suggested Madison more than Evan. There was no evidence Evan drove away from the apartment, but this was the only frame that night capturing a potentially related vehicle. All was recorded in the report: vehicle possibly matching suspects, single occupant, heading westbound at 9:04 p.m. Cameras from Target and Whole Foods parking lots were also reviewed, but all empty, no pedestrians or vehicles with unusual signs in the critical time period. This added another layer of difficulty to explain. If Evan walked as Madison said, he would have to pass at least one of these camera frames to leave the area. But there was absolutely no trace. On the other hand, the appearance of the lone sedan right at the time Evan's laptop stopped activity made many eyes in the monitoring room linger longer. One officer emphasized, "This is not evidence, just a blurry vehicle silhouette. No conclusion possible." But in a missing person case, cannot conclude is often as important as can confirm, because it reveals gaps in the statement. All relevant videos were backed up in 3 copies and placed in case storage, with clear notes that there was no direct evidence linking the camera vehicle to Madison or to Evan Ridley's disappearance. However, the lack of any images showing Evan leaving the apartment by any means led the investigation team to lean toward one direction. If Evan left the house that night, the cameras do not confirm it. If he did not leave, then Madison's words are concealing something. With this provisional conclusion, they completed the camera review step and moved on to the next part of the missing person investigation process. Immediately after completing the full review of all surveillance systems around Cool Springs and noting that no images proved Evan left the apartment on the evening of October 12th, Franklin PD moved to the next step, expanding terrain search, a mandatory procedure in missing person cases when electronic evidence and cameras provide no answers. The Williamson County Search and Rescue Team was mobilized on the morning of October 14th, assembling at the parking lot near Spencer Creek Park, where trails connect to dense wooded areas and shallow waterways leading directly to the Harpeth River. This area was chosen not only for its proximity to Evan's apartment, but also because it was a region he could walk to if he truly went outside for air, as Madison stated, and simultaneously one of the terrain routes that missing persons instinctively tend to follow. The SR team began with the Spencer Creek route, where oak and maple trees grew thickly, tall, slender trunks casting dappled shadows on the ground, still damp from overnight dew. The sound of footsteps crunching dry leaves echoed under boots, while the canine leading the way, service dog named Jasper, continuously sniffed deeply the cold Tennessee morning air. Scent articles from Evan's clothing had been provided for the canine to identify, and Jasper reacted as expected, eager at first, circling a few times, then gradually moving toward the creek bank as if starting to follow a potential trail. However, only a few dozen meters in, Jasper stopped, raised his head, and turned in the opposite direction. The canine handler officer explained this as a sign that the scent did not form a sustained trail. It was only very faint, like residual scent from Evan's home air picked up from the clothing, not a real field scent from him having passed through. The SR team tried 3 more times from 3 different starting points along Spencer Creek, but each time Jasper only reacted for the first few seconds before losing the trail, proving no strong scent trail led away from the apartment area, at least in this direction. After Spencer Creek, the group expanded the scope to the western trail, along the dirt path leading to the Harpeth River. This was a more potential area because the terrain was more open, accessible from small alleys connecting to Cool Springs Boulevard, and a place many local residents walked in the evening. But throughout more than an hour of sweeping, there were no fresh shoe prints, soil slides, or broken branches, indicating anyone had passed on the night of October 12th. The riverside soil was soft enough to retain footprints for at least 24 hours, but on the morning of October 14th, the ground was too pristine, as if no one had stepped down to the water's edge that previous evening. One SR officer noted in the report, "No fresh tracks, riverbank undisturbed." Subsequent areas were gridded out, including the small forest strip between Mallory Lane and the Harpeth tributary. One SR unit moved eastward, scanning each 10x10-meter grid square, while the other expanded along the riverbank. The sun gradually rose higher, but the forest retained its cold dampness, making the search harder as new scents were diluted by wind and light traces blurred by moisture. The K9 was tried again 3 times along the marked SR grid, but still could not hold Evan's scent beyond a few seconds. Jasper's strongest reaction occurred near a fallen tree, where he stopped and sniffed repeatedly before moving on immediately. Investigators noted, nothing proved it was Evan's scent point, just a normal K9 reaction to wildlife odor. As the scope expanded farther approaching the Harpeth River, the SAR team had to move in a line formation, each person exactly 6 feet apart, to ensure thorough ground coverage without missing small signs like fabric scraps, shoe prints, or dropped items. But the entire ground along the search route remained intact. No fresh soil disturbance, no naturally broken branches. One veteran officer quietly told the team leader, "If anyone passed through here, it was either long before or they walked too lightly to leave traces." But that contradicted the hypothesis of Evan going out at 9 p.m., because from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next morning was not enough time for shoe prints to completely disappear, especially in non-rainy weather and flat soil conditions. The SR team continued along the Harpeth River another half-mile, checking shallow water spots, rocky banks, and a few earth hollows where walkers often paused. But everything was empty, as if no one had stopped or slipped. They returned to the Spencer Creek forest for a second verification to ensure nothing was missed, and the results were the same as the first. No clues, no sustained scent, no signs of human activity. When the clock neared 1 p.m., the SAR team concluded the first search round. The summary report was recorded clearly. No physical evidence of voluntary foot travel from residents. No extended scent trail. No environmental disturbance indicating recent human movement. No one on the team said it aloud, but everyone understood the real meaning of the report. If Evan Ridley left the apartment on his own feet As Madison described, he should have left traces in one of these areas. But all signs pointed to the opposite. No movement consistent with a human in the night of October 12th. Sayer ended the search with the same heavy silence enveloping the entire case. Evan's disappearance left no natural signs of an adult voluntarily leaving home. Immediately after the SR team concluded the first search round, without recovering any trace, indicating that Evan had left the apartment by natural means, Franklin PD shifted focus to reviewing his personal life and work environment, a process aimed at determining whether the disappearance was related to psychological changes, occupational stress, or relational conflicts. The review began at the law office in Nashville, where Evan worked, about a 30-minute drive from Franklin. The head of administration confirmed that Evan showed no signs of wanting to quit, had no issues with colleagues, and especially no events in the prior week that could cause him to disappear suddenly. A legal assistant recounted that Evan was handling important cases, even staying late at the office 2 days earlier to finish court documents due the following week. All descriptions led to the same conclusion: he had no professional rifts, no financial pressure, and no signs of avoiding work. Evan's direct manager emphasized that he was punctual, responsible, and never disappeared from work even for a single day. His uncontacted absence on the morning of 10/13 was deemed not just unusual, but almost impossible. This was noted by investigators as a factor against the hypothesis that Evan left home voluntarily. After leaving Nashville, the investigation team moved on to surveying Evan's close circle of friends. First was Mark Riley, a college friend who had been close with Evan since freshman year. Upon hearing the news of his friend's disappearance, Mark was so shocked he had to repeat the question 3 times to confirm it wasn't a misunderstanding. He described Evan as predictable in habits and unpredictable in emotions, but never the type to cut off contact with family or friends. Mark also confirmed that Evan had mentioned wanting to end the relationship with Madison because it was too much stress, but he didn't want to hurt her. This was the first time investigators heard from an outsider that the relationship between Evan and Madison was seriously unstable. When pressed for details, Mark recounted that in the final months, Evan had even turned off his phone for a few hours just to escape Madison's long strings of messages. He added that Evan had never asked anyone to pick him up in the middle of the night or left home to avoid Madison, meaning he didn't have the leave to cool off behavior that Madison described. This was recorded in the report as an inconsistent behavioral pattern, contradicting Madison's statement. The second friend, Caroline Brooks, who worked with Evan at the Nashville office, confirmed that Evan truly wanted to end the relationship. According to Caroline, the last time Evan mentioned Madison was 2 weeks prior, when he said things were too messy and that Madison wouldn't accept creating distance. Caroline even recounted that Madison had a habit of sending constant messages whenever she suspected Evan was going somewhere without telling her, a behavior that Franklin PD assessed as abnormal control. This reinforced the view that their relationship was not just strained but one-sided, with Madison actively creating pressure while Evan avoided it. When investigators asked Caroline if Evan had ever mentioned wanting to move out or disappear due to emotional pressure, she denied it. He's not the type to do that. No matter how hard it got, Evan always faced it. This point further strengthened the conclusion that the disappearance was not a spontaneous choice. The third friend, Daniel Flores, provided additional information. He had witnessed a phone argument between Evan and Madison a few months earlier, in which Madison accused Evan of hiding something. Though Daniel didn't know the specifics, he remembered Evan's voice sounding very tired and repeatedly asking Madison to leave him alone for a while. When Franklin PD cross-referenced this description with Madison's statement that the meeting on the evening of 10/12 was rarely tense, they noted the discrepancy. Close associates described the relationship as frequently tense, not just occasionally. Finally, the investigation team returned to meet Evan's family to explore whether he showed signs of depression, a desire to escape daily life, or any secrets that could explain the disappearance. Evan's mother said no. His father said absolutely not. They mentioned his habit of calling his mother every morning or texting if plans changed, and that on the evening of 10/12, they didn't receive the usual good-night message. This was immediately noted by investigators because it was behavioral. A person with stable routines suddenly breaking both evening and morning habits simultaneously is a danger sign. When compiling all the information from the workplace, friends, and family, Franklin PD reached an important conclusion. There was no sign in his work or personal life indicating Evan wanted to leave his environment, even for one night. On the contrary, everyone around him described him as conflict avoidant, stable, and with specific plans for the coming days. In parallel, all sources confirmed that the relationship between Evan and Madison was full of conflict, unbalanced, and showed signs of control from Madison's side. The report concluded with a bolded important note: potential relational conflict, possible contributing factor. No one on the investigation team drew conclusions, but relational motive was officially added to the file, marking a shift in focus from the possibility of Evan leaving voluntarily to the possibility of direct personal conflict involvement with the last person to see him. Immediately after completing the review of Evan's personal life and work environment, and with all gathered information showing he had no reason to voluntarily leave his life, Franklin PD decided to launch a second field search, this time on a larger scale, with broader scope and enhanced methods, using specialized equipment. If the first search focused on areas near the apartment and walking routes Evan might have taken based on Madison's statement, the second targeted larger terrain areas, including bodies of water, dense forests, and places where human traces are often hard to spot with the naked eye, but could be detected by sonar or Williamson County's dedicated SAR team. The morning of October 15th began with Franklin PD receiving support from the Williamson County Dive Rescue Team, including 2 divers and a sonar technician. The first target was Franklin Reservoir, a wide and deep lake about 4 miles from Evan's apartment complex, selected because in missing persons cases, any large body of water within a 5-mile radius must be checked early on. The technicians lowered the sonar equipment into the calm water surface, with oscillating waves spreading like circles, sinking into the dark water. The sonar scanned segments of the lake bottom with low but sufficient resolution to detect unusually sized objects, long masses, or shapes resembling a human body, vehicle, bag, or large submerged item. In nearly an hour of continuous scanning, the system displayed only smooth curves, completely normal lake bottom terrain, with just sediment, rocks, and a few natural deep pockets. There were no signs suggesting anything new had fallen in within the last 48 hours. The dive team conducted additional checks at 2 suspicious spots, but both yielded negative results. Upon completing the sonar scan, the SAR team leader noted briefly in the report, "No anomalies detected. Reservoir clear." This did not rule out Evan ever being near the area, but completely eliminated the possibility he sank or was left in the lake. Leaving Franklin Reservoir, the search team moved to the bordering Williamson, Franklin Forest area, spanning hundreds of acres with many unofficial trails and terrain featuring low slopes, thick brush, ravines, and a few small streams. This is a place locals often jog in the mornings, but becomes almost pitch black at night. If someone entered the forest around 9 p.m., they could vanish completely without leaving much trace. But only if going deep, near the edges, the ground would retain footprints. SAR identified 4 priority zones based on reasonable distances a pedestrian from Evan's apartment could reach in 20-30 minutes. The first team entered the eastern zone, where sycamore trees grew in thick clusters with low visibility. This team used the grid cut method, walking in a horizontal line, each person 3 to 5 feet apart, to scan 20 x 20 meter plots, checking for peeled bark, disturbed soil, slide marks, or broken branches. But everything in the area was quiet and intact, as if no one had passed through on the night of 10/12. No fresh footprints, no deep shoe impressions, no fabric snagged on branches or items left behind. By late morning, they confirmed the entire eastern zone had no human signs within 48 hours. The second team entered the western zone, which had more trails and was closest to the route Madison might have taken to leave the Cool Springs area if she truly drove. Though investigators had no evidence Evan went this way, they still searched it due to the complex terrain density. SAR split into two subgroups, one following the main trail, the other pushing through thick brush. However, the situation was similar to the eastern zone: soil undisturbed, no water crossing marks, no dropped items, no clothing streaks or plastic bags caught on trees. Jasper, the lead K9, reacted more strongly than the previous day, but after a few circles and deep sniffs, he moved on, unable to hold Evan's scent long enough to lead in a specific direction. Another point noted by SAR in the report: no extended scent trail. By midday, the third team entered the southern zone, connecting to a low area leading to a tributary bank of the Harpeth. This was an area likely to retain traces due to soft soil, heavy fallen leaves, and surfaces easily disturbed by passage. But investigators quickly noted the decayed leaf layer was intact, undisturbed. The stream bank retained its natural smooth edge, unaltered. A veteran officer commented, "If anyone passed on the night of the 12th, we'd see at least one indentation or mud on the grass. But there's nothing." The final team checked the northern zone, bordering an open lot and a residential road, occasionally showing tire tracks or drag marks, but still nothing relevant. Only old truck tire marks from the previous week, and a few local resident dog prints. When SAR concluded the second search round near 3 p.m., all findings pointed to the same conclusion: no signs Evan walked, ran, slipped, or appeared in any area within 2-3 miles of home. No personal items, no dropped belongings, no tangible clues linking Evan's disappearance to the surrounding environment. The summary report included one short but sharp line: no trace of voluntary movement, no environmental evidence of subject presence. This reinforced the heavy feeling all investigators were beginning to sense. If Evan Ridley left the apartment that night, nature knew nothing about it, and if nature knew nothing, it's very likely he never left the place on his own 2 feet. Immediately after completing the second combined search, without recovering any trace in the Franklin Reservoir or Williamson Forest areas, Franklin PD moved to financial analysis, one of the strongest indicators for determining whether an adult missing person left voluntarily. In sudden disappearance cases, especially with no traces at the scene, finances often leave the clearest legal trail: a small cash withdrawal, a gas purchase, a card swipe, an online login. But when the investigation team began reviewing Evan Ridley's accounts and spending habits, they quickly realized the opposite. Everything after 10/12 stood still, as if Evan had been severed from his own life at that exact moment. Franklin PD's financial unit coordinated with Evan's bank to extract transaction history for the 72 hours before he went missing. From October 9th, 11, Evan had very regular activity: morning coffee payment at a familiar Nashville shop, a $40 ATM withdrawal near the office, $28 gas payment at a Chevron station at 6:12 p.m. on the 11th, and a small credit card charge for a monthly legal app subscription. But on October 12th, everything stopped right after 5:32 p.m., the time Evan paid for a small dinner at a sandwich shop on the way back to Franklin. No activity afterward, no card swipes, no withdrawals, no transfers. A precise and cold line marked the last moment Evan's finances moved. This immediately led investigators to note in the report, "No activity after the 12th of October 1732, unusual." Because Evan wasn't the cash-only type, he used cards for everything from small to large transactions. Disappearing from finances at the same time as disappearing physically was a strong indicator he didn't leave Franklin actively. When investigators contacted the bank's card fraud department, they confirmed that from the evening of 10/12 to the morning of 10/14, the system detected no attempts to use the card, even declined ones. No one tried withdrawing from Evan's ATM card, no one tried swiping with wrong pins, no new device logins to his online account. The account simply remained completely still. One officer concluded, if Evan went somewhere, he didn't use his card, and if someone else had his card, they didn't touch it either. That was a suspicious layer of silence in voluntary disappearance cases, because people who leave usually withdraw or use cards sooner or later for expenses, unless deliberately avoiding traces. But Evan had no motive or history suggesting he wanted to vanish that way. Next, the team reviewed Evan's work-related accounts. As a young lawyer handling civil cases for the Nashville firm, he had access to a trust account for certain professional expenses. The firm confirmed Evan logged in midday on 10/12 to view documents, but after 4:20 p.m., no further logins. This aligned perfectly with the laptop shutdown at 9:08 p.m., but more importantly, it showed Evan's afternoon was normal, with no signs of ending work or intending to quit. A responsible lawyer never leaves near-deadline court documents untouched for nearly 48 hours, unless something sudden occurs. The report to Franklin PD noted, "No further use of trust account, unusual for workload status." Meanwhile, Evan's secondary bank account for automatic bill payments was also checked. An officer compared debits and noted, phone bill auto-deducted at 2:03 a.m. on 10/13, internet subscription at 5:12 a.m., monthly card bill at 6:45 a.m. Everything continued via bank automation. But in manual activity, absolutely nothing. No apartment bill payment checked on the morning of 10/13, as habitual. No signs of login from personal computer browser or phone. No interaction indicating Evan woke up that morning and continued normal activity. When investigators asked the family, Evan's mother confirmed he always checked accounts early each day before 8 a.m. to ensure no payment errors. The absence of this behavior on the morning of 10/13 was rated highly unusual. Another important layer was in the gas card history. The system showed the last fuel transaction was the evening of 10/11 at 6:12 p.m. With Evan's car still in the garage and unmoved since the evening of 10/12, this matched the status, but it also meant the car wasn't driven out from the time Evan disappeared. Combined with camera data, SAR findings, and phone data stationary at Franklin West Tower, one thing emerged clearly: no signs Evan used any financial resources or transportation to leave Franklin. His finances and vehicle both froze at the same time. In the final review phase, Franklin PD accessed history from the bank where Evan kept a saving for legal expenses fund, a small account for future legal costs. The system recorded Evan last logged in at 4:07 p.m. on 10/12, just to check balance, with no changes or transfer preparations. This was completely normal for him, but that very normality emphasized the subsequent abnormality after 4 p.m. All of Evan's finances froze. A boxed line in the financial report to Franklin PD stated clearly, "No voluntary financial movement detected, status consistent with sudden cessation." The investigator read this line and looked at the team leader. Both understood that a person who disappears intentionally rarely leaves their finances in absolute stillness. A person severed from their life does. In summary, the financial analysis concluded clearly: no transactions, no withdrawal signs, no logins, no movement indicating Evan left Franklin by preparing or using finances. This added another layer of evidence that his disappearance was not voluntary. And more importantly, the moment everything stopped, finances, phone, computer activity, all aligned in the time frame between 8:21 p.m. and 9:08 p.m. on 10/12. A time frame only one person knew better than anyone else: Madison Carter. When the financial analysis section concluded that all of Evan Ridley's activities had abruptly stopped after the evening of October 12, phone inactive, accounts with no transactions, no logins or signals indicating he continued any activity, the Franklin PD was faced with a picture that was strangely alarming yet still lacked any direct evidence to steer the case toward a criminal direction. Over 4 consecutive days, they gathered every possible type of information: phone data, apartment checks, forest searches, sonar scans of Lake Franklin, camera reviews. Within a 2-mile radius, inspection of Madison's vehicle, interviews with friends, colleagues, and family. But the investigation, despite branching out in multiple directions, kept leading to one common point between 8:21 p.m. and 9:08 p.m. on October 12, was the last time any data about Evan existed. After that, he vanished from every system that a living person could not simultaneously stop using entirely. The biggest problem was no body, no scene, no camera capturing any trace of Evan leaving the house, and no financial transactions or activity suggesting he was still alive after that evening. Even reports from SAR and the sonar technical team concluded there were no signs of a body or large object in the entire area they had scanned. This left the case in a strange void between suspicious missing person and insufficient criminal elements. Despite the many conflicts in Evan and Madison's relationship, despite her statement being full of inconsistencies, despite no evidence supporting the possibility that Evan left voluntarily, investigators could not proceed further without traces of criminal activity. In legal terms, suspicion does not replace evidence. This file had many anomalies, but not enough for Franklin PD to obtain expanded search warrants or hold Madison for extended questioning. On the 5th day since Evan's disappearance, the lead investigator called a meeting to evaluate the entire body of information. The small meeting room inside Franklin PD grew quiet as each officer presented their part. The digital team reported no phone activity. The financial team confirmed no transactions. The SR team confirmed no footprints, scents, or any biological signs beyond natural ones. The camera review team concluded Evan appeared in no frames whatsoever. After compiling the results, the investigation team reached an unofficial but heavy conclusion. The active investigation had reached its limit. They had opened every possible door, but none led to new leads. In the final part of the meeting, the lead stood up, looked at each member, and said what no one wanted to hear: "For now, we've reached a stopping point." Under Williamson County procedures, a missing person case only continues active investigation when a body, scene, breakthrough testimony, or new physical evidence emerges. When all four conditions are absent, the case shifts to passive monitoring, awaiting new tips. Evan Ridley's file was then reclassified: missing person, no leads. Suspicious circumstances. The final phrase carried more weight than usual, but its legal significance was still too light to keep the case active. That same afternoon, the preliminary investigation report was completed and sent to the Cold Case Unit office at Franklin PD, which handles missing persons or unsolved cases after initial leads are exhausted. The Cold Case Unit does not investigate immediately. They only receive the file, store it, and schedule periodic reviews quarterly or when new data appears. When the report was signed, stamped, and Evan Ridley's file was moved to cold case intake, the silence in the meeting room lingered longer than the lengthy meeting itself. A young officer, who had participated in both field searches, quietly said as he stood up, "No one disappears from Franklin without leaving a trace." No one responded, but everyone knew deep down that the statement was true. It just wasn't enough to keep the case open. At the end of October 17, 2010, nearly 6 days after Evan Ridley was reported missing, the file officially closed its active investigation phase and was transferred to the Cold Case Unit, marking a sad chapter of silence: a man missing without a trace, an investigation full of anomalies but lacking evidence, and a file frozen before answers could be found. In the first 3 years after Evan Ridley's file was transferred to the Cold Case Unit, Franklin PD continued periodic reviews as per procedure. Every quarter, the file was reopened to check for any new updated data, emerging tips, or improved technology applicable to old evidence. However, from 2011 to 2013, every effort led to the same heavy conclusion that investigators had grown familiar with nothing had changed. And there was no progress. Evan's case fell into the most haunting group of files, not because of too many suspicions, but because of too few facts to follow. Yet, as often happens in missing persons cases that capture community attention, scattered tips began appearing sporadically. The first came in February 2011, when a resident in Murfreesboro called Franklin PD, saying she was certain she had seen Evan in the parking lot of a gym. The tipster described a tall man with brown hair and a scholarly build, features matching Evan's public profile. The cold case unit sent 2 officers to check, but the gym's cameras, despite low resolution, showed the person was not Evan. Different gait, different face, and license plate, not matching any of his known associates. A few months later, in the summer of 2011, a truck driver contacted police because he thought he had seen a man who looked like Evan at a rest stop near the Kentucky border. The driver described the man as appearing confused, like he was looking for directions. The cold case unit immediately checked the rest stop cameras, but limited angles only captured half the man's frame, and though hair and height were similar, a baseball cap obscured most of the face. When enlarged, the image confirmed it was not Evan. The forehead ratio, hairline, and posture did not match. Early in 2012, a student in Knoxville reported seeing a man scarily similar to Evan Ridley in the dorm area, but when police followed up, the person in question was a new transfer student who resembled Evan but had clear identification records. This tip was closed quickly, but it reminded the cold case unit of something. Time passing did not fade. The case in some people's eyes, on the contrary, its mystery made people prone to associating any similar face with Evans. Another tip in late 2012, an anonymous email, claimed Evan was living under a new name in East Tennessee. The email was brief, with no address, no evidence, just a vague statement. The cold case unit still noted it in the file, but could not act without anything to verify. In reality, emails like this were so numerous that over half were from curious people or those far away who saw Evan's photo online. Franklin PD moved most to unverified and, per procedure, only pursued tips with specific location descriptions or suspicious behavior. In 2013, one tip examined more closely was a call from a Franklin resident saying he saw a man who looked like Evan standing on the pedestrian bridge near Harpeth River at dawn. Police checked the area within 20 minutes of the call, but found no one. Street cameras from that time recorded footage, but were nearly useless due to low resolution and weak street lighting. The only frame with a person showed the silhouette of a man walking away from the camera, blurred in the mist, unidentifiable. The cold case unit marked the tip, unable to verify, and closed it. What frustrated investigators most in this period was not the number of false tips, but their repetitive nature. All led to dead ends. All were vague faces fitted into public memory. All created no new direction. Meanwhile, the file's automated monitoring data, bank accounts, personal email, login records, remained completely static from late 2010 through 2013, not moving once. Credit cards unused, email unopened, phone unactivated, no signs of life on paper. This made the case increasingly characterized as a sudden disappearance, but that suddenness helped nothing without connecting information. Every quarter, the cold case unit opened Evan Ridley's file, reviewed SAR reports, re-examined phone data, and in some sessions, recontacted the family for updates. Though they knew the answer was always the same, no new information. Younger investigators in the unit often fell into a dilemma, not wanting to give up on the case, but having no reason to push it forward without new elements. For them, Evan's file became a symbol of helplessness in missing persons investigations. Everything was abnormal, but nothing led to concrete evidence. By the end of 2013, Franklin PD had to note in the 3-year evaluation report, no indications victim is alive, no indications victim is deceased, no new leads. File remains in cold case status. Amid those frozen pages, silence was the only answer. And in missing persons cases, sometimes that very silence is the most haunting thing. By early 2014, after more than 3 years of Evan Ridley's file sitting in cold case no leads status, the cold case unit at Franklin PD began applying a new method in file reviews, reanalyzing 2010 cell tower data using new software that allowed unpacking old log files with higher detail than the original technology. At the time of Evan's disappearance, carrier systems only stored compressed logs, enough to show which tower the phone connected to, but not enough to analyze secondary signals or signal strength across connection phases. By 2014, the carrier had upgraded storage systems, inadvertently opening the possibility for more detailed decoding of what seemed like frozen data. When the cold case unit submitted a formal request to re-extract full logs from the Franklin West, Franklin East and Cool Springs South towers for the window of 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. on October 12, 2010, they expected little. Most missing persons cases from that era had raw data too crude to be useful. But when the log file was fully unpacked, a series of data lines appeared that had never been seen before. These were not standard connect records, but information about the phone re-registering location with the tower, when signals fluctuated or the device changed relative distance to the tower. Such records in 2010 were often dismissed as meaningless due to low accuracy, high noise, and no support for precise location tracking. But with 2014 software, the cold case unit could clearly read layers of metadata previously ignored. When the PD's network technician loaded the location map of the three main towers around Evan's apartment onto the analysis screen, they saw the entire Franklin area divided into overlapping coverage cells. Franklin West was the strongest and closest to Evan, his phone connected to it almost continuously. But the anomaly appeared in the confirmed final period Evan was alive, 8:40 p.m. to 8:57 p.m. In this 17-minute window, the log recorded 3 tower registrations with Franklin West, but accompanied by secondary signals indicating the phone was nearly touching the edge of the Franklin South coverage area, the zone bordering the Williamson Forest searched in 2010. This did not mean the phone moved far, as 2010 algorithms often recorded signal bubbles from indoor interference or when the phone was near a window. However, the current anomaly differed in that all 3 logs leaned in the same direction, south near the edge of Franklin West coverage, adjacent to the area SAR had scanned but found nothing. In the original 2010 logs, these signals only showed as update, no value. But the new software allowed calculating signal deviation. All 3 had similar deviations, with values -9 to -12 dBm, compared to the average when the phone was deep inside the apartment zone. This suggested the phone was either placed near a physical interference point or slightly moved south from its usual position. The cold case unit immediately compared it to Evan's apartment layout. The back door faced directly south, overlooking the low trees connecting to the Williamson Forest edge. One technician asked, could the phone register this deviation if Evan stepped out the back door? But the investigator quickly reminded the phone was found inside the house, on the kitchen counter. It was not taken outside, so where did the signal deviation come from? One hypothesis emerged. The phone may have been held or moved inside the apartment between 8:40 and 8:57 p.m. before being placed back. But this did not fit the activity data. Evan sent no texts or calls in that window, and per Madison, they only talked in the living room. Another hypothesis, the phone was taken toward the back door by someone else, not Evan. But no physical evidence supported this hypothesis. Nonetheless, the anomaly could not be ignored. The analysis team continued comparing these 3 logs to those before and after. All logs before 8:40 p.m. and after 8:57 p.m. were stable, no deviations, no flares, no signs of phone movement. Only in those 17 minutes did the signal distort southward. A network technician made a key note. If the phone moved at least 10-15 feet toward the back door, this deviation could appear. If someone held the phone near the door, the signal could be pulled toward Franklin South. This silenced the group for a few seconds. In the entire initial investigation file, no one reported Evan holding the phone during the argument. The phone was found resting on the kitchen counter, and Madison clearly stated Evan took nothing with him when he went out to the backyard. The phone registering signs of being near the back door edge subtly but critically contradicted her statement. The cold case unit continued extracting further analysis from the Franklin South Tower. There, a secondary record at 8:53 p.m. showed a very weak signal level, almost just a probe ping, a type of tower registration when a device touches the coverage edge but does not hand off. This ambiguous trough occurs when the device is at the extreme edge of Franklin West, facing the Williamson Forest. In the 2010 file, this line was completely overlooked, but in 2014, it became the second anomaly in the same sequence. The investigation team, though unable to conclude anything, noted clearly in the report cell deviation anomaly, directional pull toward Williamson Wood Zone, significance undetermined. They did not claim the device left the apartment. They did not claim the phone was held by someone else. But for the first time in 3 years, the data pointed to something outside the initial statements and outside what police saw in the apartment. In the critical 17 minutes, Evans' phone was not completely stationary. It oriented south toward the forest zone where no leads were found in 2010. This was the first time the file had a detail mismatched with the explanation Evan never left the house and also mismatched with Madison's account. And this tiny anomaly, a once ignored signal fluctuation, raised a chilling question: if the phone moved and Evan did not take it, then who held it? When the cell tower data anomaly was documented and added to the file, the cold case unit continued expanding the analysis direction by leveraging tools unavailable in the 2010 investigation, Williamson County's new GIS system, and archived commercial civilian satellite imagery by year. From 2014 to 2017, GIS technology advanced rapidly to the point that cold case teams began using it to compare terrain changes over time, a technique inapplicable early on due to lack of baseline data and real need. But the south-directed signal anomaly toward the Williamson Forest edge prompted investigators to ask whether any terrain changes in that area coincided with Evans' disappearance. A county GIS technician started by loading all medium-resolution satellite images from 2009 to 2013, mainly from public sources like USGS and some commercial images the county had access rights to. Though resolution was not high enough to see small objects clearly, major ground changes, such as disturbed soil, new vehicle tracks, or cleared trees, could still be detected when layered for comparison. The analysis area was circled based on the radius suggested by the cell tower anomaly, a forest section extending from the Franklin West edge to the depression bordering Williamson Woods, where SAR searched but found nothing in 2010. In the 2009 satellite layer, the area appeared as uniform forest, with many deciduous trees in sparse but stable canopy distribution, interspersed with natural clearings. By the 2010 layer, taken in late fall, the technician began noticing a small irregularity, a patch of ground brighter than the surrounding background, no longer than a few meters, located about 40-50 yards from a secondary trail edge. The image date, late November 2010, coincided with 1 month after Evans' disappearance. Initially, the change could simply be rain erosion or animal digging. But when the technician overlaid the 2010 image directly on 2009, the difference became clearer. The patch was not a natural depression, it was disturbed soil, compressed flat and brighter, as if the surface had been impacted then covered with a thin soil layer. In the 2011 image, the area was slightly darker, beginning to grow new grass, but soil color still differed from surroundings. By 2012, new canopy began covering part of it, but the uneven soil edge outline remained visible, a type often seen in areas dug then allowed to naturally regenerate. Continuing to 2013-2014 images, the technician noted the patch gradually blended into the forest's overall color, but one odd point: vegetation regrew slower than nearby areas, as if the new soil layer had different density or moisture from the original natural base. From 2014 to 2016, commercial satellite images gained higher resolution, especially those taken in low sun conditions. Using shadow analysis mode, the technician discovered the disturbed soil area reflected light at different angles than the surrounding forest. Based on the reflection, darker at edges, lighter in center, the technician concluded the area had a slightly concave surface, not flat like natural surrounding patches. The cold case unit, experienced in reading terrain changes via imagery, immediately took note. This could indicate mechanical intervention, digging, burying, refilling, in late 2010. An officer who participated in the initial forest search said the area might have been overlooked, if not on a direct trail or without obvious ground traces. This fit perfectly, as satellite images showed that though soil was disturbed, the top cover had been made relatively flat, enough to be hard for the naked eye to notice after a few weeks. When comparing summer 2010 images to late fall 2010, the change was clear. Soil color shifted from dark brown to grayish bright. In about 10-12 square meters, light reflection differed. A GIS technician noted, "This soil patch does not appear in prior year's images." Change occurred between September, November 2010. The chilling coincidence lay in the timeline. Evan Ridley disappeared on October 12, 2010. No one could say for sure the soil color change related to the case, but the cell tower anomaly pointed that direction, and multi-year satellite images confirmed the patch changed only during the period surrounding the disappearance. A report was prepared, summarizing the finding: GIS anomaly, possible soil disturbance between October, Nov 2010, in Williamson Woods fringe area. No prior or subsequent disturbances. From then on, the cold case unit for the first time in years had a geographic point coinciding in time, direction, and the phone's abnormal coverage zone. A small, faint point, but in the world of traceless disappearances, a differently colored soil patch in the forest can sometimes matter more than an inconsistent timeline statement. From the initial discovery of the disturbed land area in satellite imagery during 2010-2014, the cold case unit moved into an expanded analysis phase around 2018-2020. When new generation GIS tools allowed them to process higher resolution satellite images and overlay multiple data layers simultaneously. The goal was to create a comprehensive map of every location, showing signs of terrain alteration across the entire forest area bordering Franklin, Williamson, not just the previously identified zone. This was a complex task because Williamson Forest spans hundreds of acres, and much of the terrain naturally changes with the seasons: falling leaves, soil deposition, animal burrowing, trees downed by storms. To distinguish natural changes from anomalous ones, the GIS team had to compare images from at least 4 seasons across consecutive years, while integrating indices like NDVI to assess vegetation greenness. Once the data was loaded into the analysis system, the software flagged more than 60 areas with changes in soil color, light reflectance, or tree density between 2009 and 2014. But most of these points were eliminated in the initial round because they coincided with legal activities such as digging holes for utility poles, trail creation by locals, or mud accumulation after heavy rain. The investigators narrowed the list by applying a time-based filter. Only alterations appearing between September and November 2010 were considered. This eliminated more than half of the changed points. Still, they were left with 19 locations showing anomalous changes occurring precisely during the time Evan disappeared. In the next step, technicians used light analysis modeling to examine the depth and shape of shadows around the disturbed points. Areas of previously dug soil often have unevenly compacted surfaces, creating slightly distorted shadow patterns that the human eye struggles to detect, but analytical systems can identify. From the original 19 points, only 12 remained with characteristics similar to mechanical surface alterations. This mixed list became the 12-point suspect map, a dataset the cold case unit had never possessed during the entire time the case was frozen. Each point was assigned an identifier code and ranked by degree of deviation from the natural background. A veteran officer said that if just one of those 12 points proved valuable, they would have their first lead after nearly 8 years without clues. However, 12 points were still too broad for ground searches, so the cold case unit added a final filtering step, overlaying this map with 2010 camera data, particularly the video footage of a dark-colored sedan driving alone at 9:04 p.m., the vehicle potentially belonging to Madison Carter. Although the cameras from that year were low quality, the car's path was still roughly determined from the direction of Evans' apartment onto Cool Springs Boulevard, then turning northwest. If the hypothesis that the camera vehicle was Madison's was correct, that path would create a geographic corridor cutting diagonally through three forests bordering Franklin, Williamson. The cold case unit integrated this route into the GIS map, a red linear path running across low tree areas, intersecting 6 of the 12 disturbed points. But only 3 of those 6 points were near drivable access roads, within 50 to 200 yards of dirt paths where a vehicle could stop unnoticed in 2010. These 3 points were labeled S3, S7, and S11. Point S3 was near the intersection of a side trail and an unofficial forest entrance, a spot secluded enough for a vehicle to stop briefly without being seen at night. Satellite data showed this location had a distinct soil color change in late 2010, which gradually faded over the next 2 years. Point S7 was deeper in, about 90 yards from access, under a cluster of maple trees. The change here was smaller but concave, indicating a compressed soil patch. One technician noted, "Very unlikely an animal caused such a uniform depression." Point S11 was right at the edge of Williamson Woods, where the soil was wetter and less frequented by people. This point was rated high probability because the alteration persisted for nearly 3 years before blending into the natural background. When the 12-point map was overlaid with the vehicle's camera-recorded path, investigators noticed that these 3 suspect points formed an arc aligned exactly with the anomaly direction from the cell tower between 8:40–8:57 p.m. The convergence of digital and terrain data made the cold case unit pause longer in front of the screen. No one claimed this was the solution. Disturbed soil could result from many natural factors, but when all 3 datasets, satellite, cell tower, and camera vehicle path, pointed to a narrow geographic area, that coincidence could not be ignored. The cold case unit's end of 2020 report included a brief but weighty sentence: 3 areas identified with high anomaly levels, coinciding with event timeline. Recommend on-site survey when conditions allow. After nearly a decade, the Evan Ridley file finally had a clear directional map, not certain, but enough to break the long freeze on the case. In February 2021, a bone-chilling morning in Williamson Forest began like any other, quiet, foggy, the faint crunch of decaying leaves underfoot, and the subtle scent of pine sap clinging like thin frost to the wood grain. Local forestry workers, a 3-man team from the County Trail Maintenance Unit, were assigned to clear downed trees after strong winds earlier in the month. They had been hiking for nearly 2 hours along a trail leading to the edge of the S11 zone, one of the 3 anomalous points marked by the cold case unit, though none of the team knew that. For them, it was just a routine winter field check. No one imagined that morning would shatter the silence that had enveloped the Evan Ridley case for over 10 years. Around 9:12 a.m., as the fog began to lift from the ground, the lead worker, named Gerald Patterson, reported seeing something off ahead. A patch of ground had a color different from the forest floor. A large area about 2 meters across, lower, brighter, and notably thinner leaf litter on top than normal, as if wind and nature couldn't fully cover it like other areas. At first, the team thought it might be animal digging or a spot where a fallen tree had been removed. But as Gerald approached, he froze mid-step. Beneath the thin leaf layer, a long ivory-white bone segment was visible. Not large, not intact, but too straight, too slender, too clean to be animal. Gerald called his 2 colleagues, and all 3 stood silently staring down, not daring to touch it. Another worker crouched and gently brushed aside decaying leaves with a stick. Then another bone segment appeared, protruding from the soil like something buried long ago. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Only the wind whistled lightly through the bare trees. Gerald pulled out his phone and called 911, his voice trying to stay calm but clearly shaking. "I think we just found human bones," The dispatcher immediately routed the call to Franklin PD and TBI. Within 40 minutes, the area was sealed off. Yellow tape encircled a 50-meter radius, and crime scene personnel began systematically excavating the soil. As the first layer was removed, they saw the first item beyond bones, a small metal watch with a round face, its strap nearly rotted away from the case. Though caked in dirt and corroded, it retained enough shape to be recognizable. A young officer whispered, "God, it's just like the one Evan wore every day." The watch was immediately bagged and sealed, but everyone knew the significance of the find. Further layers revealed a torn leather wallet, no longer holding shape, just crumbling cardboard remnants and damp, darkened leather patches. Nothing remained inside, no cards, money or papers, but the wallet's surface had distinctive hand stitching that Evan's mother had described in old files. That very coincidence sent a chill down the spines of the on-scene investigators, colder than the February wind blowing through the forest. And then, the final and most chilling piece of evidence emerged as they dug deeper. A length of gray-ash nylon cord, about 40 centimeters long, tangled in the soil, and wrapped in small roots. One end was knotted, the other frayed. No one said it aloud, but no one needed an explanation. This wasn't naturally occurring cord. This wasn't trash from a camping trip. This was evidence of foul play, the first clear sign in a case, frozen for 11 years. Meanwhile, the forensics team continued digging until the rest of the skeleton was exposed. No soft tissue remained, no conventional identification markers, just long bones, decayed ribs, and an incomplete skull. But the overall shape, position, and decomposition level indicated the skeleton had been there a long time. Buried deeply and intentionally, evenly compacted soil. A thin cover layer enough to conceal, but not fully integrate naturally in the first year. The forensic technician noted that the soil layering showed mechanical intervention. Soil turned over, refilled, then compacted with light force, matching the disturbance signatures from the GIS satellite analysis. When surveying a 5-meter radius around the burial site, the team found a few fabric scraps and small fibers, but not enough for immediate identification. Still, the presence of the watch, wallet, nylon cord, and skeleton in the same spot made this a discovery of immense legal weight. The one Franklin PD had waited over a decade for. A forensic specialist, standing up from the excavation, said something not in the report, but heard by all. "We found him." News reached Franklin PD and TBI within minutes, and investigators from the original 2010 Evan case stood silent upon hearing it. Some gripped their coffee cups until their knuckles went white, some turned away, some sat down as if releasing a burden carried for 11 years. But at the same time, a new burden emerged. If this was Evan Ridley, someone had killed him, buried him, and kept that secret for over a decade. The crime scene was expanded by another 30 meters, and cameras were set up to document the entire recovery process. The nylon cord was prioritized for lab fiber analysis, while the skeleton was sealed and transported to the medical examiner's office in Nashville for dental and DNA identification. From that moment, the Evan Ridley missing person case was no longer a disappearance. It became a homicide, a deliberately concealed murder. And the start of that turning point was just a small anomaly on a GIS map, a forgotten cell tower signal from 10 years prior, and a group of forestry workers who happened to pass by what seemed like peaceful ground on a winter morning. Now that layer of peace was completely stripped away, revealing the dark core that no one had seen for 11 years. Evan didn't vanish. He was brought here, buried right at the forest edge where the 2010 SR team had passed, but never detected. As the final soil was turned and the skeleton placed in a forensic transfer bag, Franklin PD knew for the first time they held an undeniable truth, evidence that doesn't lie. A few hours later, the remains were delivered to the medical examiner's office in Nashville, triple-sealed per TBI standards. As forensic technicians opened the bags and placed the skull and long bones on the cold steel table, a faint smell of damp earth and decay from 11 years underground rose gently. No one in the room spoke much. They all understood this wasn't just bones, but potentially the key to ending a mystery that had haunted Franklin for nearly a decade. The first priority: confirm identity. Specialists extracted marrow samples from the femur, one of the sites that best preserves DNA even after long decomposition. The samples were centrifuged, extracted, then run through STR analysis, compared against the DNA sample Evans' family provided in 2010. The process took over 24 hours, but the next morning, when the data appeared on screen, the forensics team fell silent for a moment before the lead said aloud, "Matched. 99.9998%. The skeleton was Evan Ridley's. Identity confirmation was immediately sent to Franklin PD with a summary report. There was no doubt, no error, no mix-up, no look-alike. Evan had lain at the edge of Williamson Forest for 11 years, just a short distance from where SAR had passed. But the more critical question than identity was cause of death. Analysis of the neck bones began right after identification. At the scene, technicians had noted many small neck bones were fractured or abnormally bent, but careful examination was needed to distinguish perimortem injury from post-mortem natural effects. When the hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage were placed under microscope, pathologists observed uneven abrasion on bone edges, a pattern common from strong compression by a soft but continuously tightening object, like nylon cord or thick fabric. The hyoid showed compression fracture, sharp break without fragmentation, consistent with ligature strangulation rather than manual. Manual strangulation often leaves fingernail marks or uneven compression. Soft ligature creates stable fractures on both hyoid horns and sometimes bends the thyroid cartilage. Both features were present here. When compared to the nylon cord recovered at the scene, the forensics team did not conclude it was definitely used, but noted the cord type fully matched the force capable of causing the observed injuries. One pathologist described, "This is not accidental death. This is strangulation, an intentional ligature strangulation." Next, they assessed fractures on ribs and arm bones. No clear defensive wounds like arm breaks from blocking blows, but a small crack on the left humerus, not enough to conclude struggle injury, but noted that Evan may have been suddenly restrained before strangulation. No evidence of severe head trauma. No major skull fractures. This fits cases where the victim was attacked from behind or controlled in a confined space. Examiners also checked for forensic entomology signs, but the long decomposition period made insect succession timing inapplicable. However, soil temperature and conditions at the burial site allowed estimation that Evan died within 12 to 24 hours of last family contact on the evening of October 12, 2010. Another notable sign was the burial positioning. Not deep, but sufficient for concealment. A hasty but intentional burial. Soil was very even, no signs of large tools like shovels, more like digging with smaller implements, possibly a folding shovel or small pick. This suggests the perpetrator acted quickly to hide, with limited time, ensuring the body wouldn't be found soon. Combined with the cell tower data pointing toward the forest, the forensics team saw a chilling match. If Evan's phone was carried and moved toward the back door by someone else between 8:40 and 8:57 p.m., that time frame fully aligns with the attack period. But forensic analysis relies on bones, not speculation. Based on all signs, the official report stated, cause of death, ligature strangulation. Manner of death, homicide. Franklin PD received the report that afternoon. As the lead investigator read each line of the conclusion, no one in the room spoke. 11 years of waiting, 11 years of a frozen file, 11 years of only theories and contradictions, now replaced by a few short but absolutely clear sentences. Evan was strangled to death. Not accident, not suicide, not voluntary disappearance. This was murder. The bones don't lie, and they said what all the 2010 data couldn't. Finding the torn wallet, watch, and nylon cord wasn't just physical evidence. They were pieces showing someone wanted Evan gone and succeeded for a decade. Now, with the forensic conclusion in hand, Franklin PD opened a new file, no longer labeled missing person case, but recoded as homicide. ligature strangulation. The case number was updated, files moved from missing persons to unsolved homicides. And from that moment, the investigators' mission changed completely, no longer find the missing person, but hunt the person who killed Evan Ridley. The journey spanning over a decade entered a new chapter, heavier, clearer, and darker, as Franklin PD faced the truth that Evan didn't disappear into the darkness, he was taken from life and buried in it. The morning after, when the full forensic report was submitted and the homicide classification was officially formalized, the cold case unit immediately convened its first meeting. In the small room behind the Franklin PD, all the files from 2010 to 2021 were spread out, time-faded reports, blurry photocopied statements, thick SAR search diagrams. But this time, no one was looking at them through the lens of missing person, cause unknown anymore. Everyone shared a new common goal, starting the hunt for the killer. The cold case team leader opened the meeting with a short but game-changing sentence. "We're no longer looking for a missing person, we're hunting the person who killed him." From that point, the 2010 file was reread from the first page, with every small detail like ripples on a lake's surface, once thought meaningless, now connecting to the newly confirmed forensic evidence. First was Madison Carter's statement. When rereading the transcript, the inconsistencies previously dismissed as mere inconsistencies now took on an entirely different meaning. Her inability to recall exact arrival and departure times, 8:20 or 8:30, 9 o'clock or 9:10, had once just made it hard for police to build a timeline, but now, with Evans strangled between approximately 8:40, 8:57 p.m., based on hyoid bone evidence and cell tower anomalies, those shifts became suspicious signals. Madison was the only person present with Evan during the exact window the medical examiner determined the attack occurred. Next was her description of Evan going out the back door for some air, while all phone data, camera footage, and SAR evidence showed Evan never left the apartment alone. Madison's list of inconsistencies grew longer with every page turned. She said the back door slammed shut, a detail once considered insignificant, but with Evan's hyoid bone fractured by a cord, the slamming door was no longer just noise from an argument. It could have been part of a sequence of actions the killer took while moving the body or leaving the scene. When the investigators cross-referenced Madison's initial statement with the complete timeline data, they identified three critically important intersection points. 1. Evans' last sent text at 8:21 p.m. 2. The laptop shutting down at 9:08 p.m. 3. Madison saying she left around 9 o'clock or a bit before, meaning she was present throughout the entire attack window. During the reanalysis session, one investigator stated bluntly, "There is no objective data showing Evan was alive after Madison left, and no data showing he was alive while she was still there." The 2010 file now became sharp, like a background image adjusted for higher resolution. Small points once overlooked, due to the lack of a body, began connecting. The cell tower anomaly from Section 17, 3 instances of Evan's phone pulling toward the Williamson forest, was re-examined. If Evan wasn't carrying the phone, the only person who could have had it was Madison. Moreover, the southward deviation toward the apartment's back door perfectly matched an offender moving inside the home, unconsciously dragging or carrying the phone. When rereading the 2010 report on Madison's vehicle inspection, the cold case unit flagged 2 details once deemed insufficient for impound, new floor mats, and a strong cleaning chemical smell. Previously, they were just facts without enough evidence. But after the buried body was found, they became suspicious concealment behavior. Though Madison's car contained no blood or physical evidence, its unusual cleanliness now carried different weight. The team also noted, in 2010, they couldn't test car mats with modern plant spore analysis technology that made the newly replaced floor mats detail valuable. When the camera timeline footage was reviewed again, the frame capturing a dark-colored sedan at 9:04 p.m., with only one occupant, now had new context. The moment the laptop shut down, if that car was Madison's, it aligned exactly with the timestamp, proving she left the scene right after the estimated time of the murder. Though not 100% confirmable, the cold case unit marked that frame in red. At this point, all the previously scattered old data began connecting into a chain statement: inconsistency, cell tower anomaly, unusual vehicle cleanliness. 2010 ground disturbance, GPS points matching the backdoor direction timeline, cut off at 9:08 p.m. Madison, as the last person to see Evan, Madison leaving the apartment at the exact laptop. Shutdown time, body discovery location, consistent with the camera recorded route. The lead investigator circled in red an initial 2010 conclusion, once deemed insufficient basis, no evidence Evan voluntarily left the apartment. Now, that line became the central puzzle piece of the case. When all fragments from 2010 to 2021 were connected into one continuous timeline, the cold case unit reached a conclusion they couldn't record in 2010. Madison Carter was not just the last person to see Evan Ridley alive, she was the only person with the opportunity, timing, and location to kill him. Since no one else appeared within the apartment's perimeter, no signs of forced entry, and no other statements describing a third party, the cold case unit identified Madison as the sole viable suspect. This was not an intuitive conclusion. It was the logical outcome of all objective data reassembled in the context of forensically proven homicide. From cell phone signal anomalies to 2010 terrain changes, from the nylon cord discovery to the hyoid bone examination, from the new car mats to her imprecise time explanations. Everything now meshed like the teeth of a gear turning in the right direction. For the first time since Evan Ridley disappeared, all data from 2010 to 2021 was no longer scattered fragments in separate file drawers. They reassembled into a seamless chain, a tense meeting, a period of lost trace, a suddenly shut down laptop, a buried body, and one person appearing throughout the entire sequence. The file no longer ended in a question mark, it shifted to a clear investigative direction. The Evan Ridley case was a homicide with a central suspect, Madison Carter. A case file that had lain dormant in cold storage for a decade suddenly heated up again, and for the first time, it took the complete shape of a prosecutable murder. Immediately after that direction was established, the cold case unit moved to the next critical step in the reinvestigation phase, comparing Madison Carter's two statements. The original statement from the night of October 12, 2010, and the short voluntary statement in 2021, after Evan's body was confirmed. The two statements, more than 10 years apart, were given in completely different contexts, one for a missing boyfriend, the other for a murdered boyfriend. That very distance made every crack in Madison's story start to show clearly. In the Franklin PD meeting room, the whiteboard was divided into two columns, 2010 and 2021. Each time an investigator read a line from the original statement, another cross-referenced it with the equivalent line from 2021. In just 40 minutes, the board was covered in red underlines. By the end of the morning, a total of 14 major inconsistencies were identified. Not minor forgotten details, but fundamental changes involving time, location, behavior, and event sequence. Inconsistency 1. Time: Madison arrived at the home. 2010, around 8:30 p.m. 2021, around 8 o'clock or earlier. This shift does not align with Evan's text sent at 8:21 p.m. Inconsistency 2. Time she left the home. 2010, close to 9, around 9:10, not sure. 2021, I left well before 9. But camera footage shows a car matching hers at 9:04 p.m. Inconsistency 3. Evan's last known position in the home. 2010, he was standing by the kitchen counter. 2021, he was sitting on the sofa. If Evan moved, there would be a reason. But the laptop shutdown at 9:08 p.m. shows he wasn't actively moving around. Inconsistency 4. Whether the back door was opened. 2010, he opened the door and went out. 2021. I don't remember if he stepped out or just stood near it. This is a key detail because the phone signal anomaly shows the device was taken near the back door, but Evan wasn't holding the phone. Inconsistency 5. Whether Evan was carrying anything when leaving his last position. 2010. He wasn't carrying anything. 2021. He might have had his phone. This directly contradicts the discovery that the phone was inside the home. Inconsistency 6. Content of the argument. 2010. Nothing serious. 2021. We argued about the future, about him being distant. This expansion of detail occurred right when police confirmed homicide. Inconsistency 7. How long the argument lasted. 2010. About 40 minutes. 2021. About an hour and a half. This difference alters the entire weapon timeline. Inconsistency 8. Direction Evan walked out. 2010. South backyard. 2021. He might have gone toward the parking lot, but ETSAR data proves no one walked in any direction. Inconsistency 9. Whether Madison heard any noises. 2010. Just the door. 2021. Maybe something falling. Forensic examination confirmed no head trauma. Inconsistent with a falling object noise she described. Inconsistency 10. Evan's emotional state. 2010. He was calm. 2021. He was panicked, out of control. This contradicts friends' descriptions that Evan always avoided confrontation. Inconsistency 11. Reason she left. 2010. I wanted to let him calm down. 2021. He asked me to leave. Two reasons implying two different mental states. Inconsistency 12. Whether she turned back. 2010. I drove straight to Brentwood. 2021. He had turned around partway but didn't stop. This detail corresponds to the sedan on camera, possibly showing she adjusted her story to fit new data. Inconsistency 13. When she realized Evan was missing. 2010. The next morning when family called. 2021. I was worried that same night but didn't dare go back. This is a clear concealment shift. Inconsistency 14. Description of the forest area, and this was the biggest and most dangerous inconsistency. In the 2021 statement, when informally answering where Evan might have mentioned wanting to walk, Madison described the southern forest area with low-lying ground and few large trees. This description matched almost exactly the body recovery site, Williamson Forest, where the ground has unusual depressions, proven by GIS analysis. The investigators paused for a long time on this one. The frightening part wasn't the coincidence, it was that this description had never been released. In 2010, media only reported searches along the Harpeth River and Spencer Creek. No one knew police hadn't searched deep into Sector S11. No one knew the satellite imagery showed disturbed soil. No one knew the burial area had depressed terrain features. But Madison knew. When cross-referencing the 2010 statement, she never mentioned the forest. In 2021, she described it very specifically, even using the phrase low-lying and dark at night, a description only possible if someone had stood in that area. The lead investigator wrote in his notebook, "Insider information impossible to obtain without having been near the original scene." When all 14 inconsistencies were connected in chronological order, the cold case unit realized Madison's changes were not random. She adjusted her account according to the timing, according to what police knew, according to what she thought police could prove. In 2010, with no body, the story centered on Evan walking out back. In 2021, with the body found in the forest, she mentioned the forest. When the phone anomaly was internally disclosed, she added he had his phone. When the 9:04 p.m. camera was revisited, she said, "I turned around." Each change was an evasion, forced by adjustment, like patching new fabric over an old torn net. But the more patches, the more holes. A younger officer said quietly in the meeting room. She didn't change because she misremembered. She changed to make the story fit the new evidence. But the most critical was the final detail. Madison accurately described the terrain type where the remains were found before police released any information. This moved beyond the realm of inconsistency into the realm of knowledge of someone who had been at the scene. Comparing the full 2010, 2021 statements no longer showed Madison Carter as merely suspicious. It showed she knew far more than a witness possibly could. That pushed her from sole suspect to central suspect. The missing person file suddenly revealed its true form as every word Madison said was reread, not through what she told, but through what she tried to fix. In criminal investigation, the truth sometimes doesn't emerge in the original story, but in the parts altered when the teller senses the truth closing in. Looking at the whiteboard covered in inconsistencies, no one in the room still asked whether Madison was involved. The only remaining question was, how did she do it between 8:40 and 9:08 p.m.? To answer that question, the cold case unit returned to the evidence locker, where a small detail forgotten for 11 years was waiting to be re-examined. Madison's car mat had been returned at the end of 2010 because Franklin PD then lacked probable cause to hold it, no blood, no damage, no signs of crime. But they had retained a sample, just a small cut from the edge of the old mat before Madison installed new ones. That sample sat sealed in a bag for 11 years, almost forgotten in evidence storage, because at the time, it held no evidentiary value. But after Madison's 2021 statement revealed clear inconsistencies and Evan's body was found in Williamson Forest, the cold case unit revisited all old evidence, and that small mat piece, only about 6x8 cm, suddenly became the pivot opening an entirely new investigative branch. This time, instead of just testing for proteins or blood as in 2010, the forensic team applied plant spore analysis technology, a technique not common when Evan disappeared, but now standard in cold cases. They spread the sample under a high-power microscope, using special tape to separate fibers and collect all pollen grains, spores, and microscopic plant fragments adhering to the surface. The result made the entire team pause for several seconds. The mat sample contained a mixture of Oreobasidium pullulans, Cladosporium, and Basidiospore spores, fungal types characteristic of Williamson Forest in autumn months. To confirm, they took soil and leaf samples from Sector Set 11, where Evan's body was found, and compared them. The spore distribution ratios between the two samples matched astonishingly, not only in species, but in relative proportions: 40% decayed wood spores, 32% soft-bodied fungal spores, 18% lichen spores, the remainder pollen from weed species growing only in southern Franklin forests. A forensic specialist said quietly, "This level of coincidence is impossible unless the vehicle had been in or stopped at that forest." This was the first data point confirming Madison's car mat had been in Williamson Forest on or after the evening of October 12, 2010. But that was only half the truth. The other half lay in evidence from Evan's clothing, collected in 2010 but never thoroughly analyzed due to no body for comparison. That clothing, a cotton shirt, an undershirt, and pants, had been stored in cold evidence for years, unexamined because no blood or impact signs were found. This time, the forensic team sampled fibers stuck to the shirt collar, where a tiny cluster adhered to the folded edge. Under the microscope, the cluster appeared as gray-ash nylon fibers, approximately 12 micrometers in diameter, nearly identical to the ash-colored nylon cord recovered from Site S11. But what made the lab pause longest was the microfiber type in that cluster. They did not belong to Evan's clothing fabric. They belonged to automotive carpet, the 2007-2010 blend of polypropylene and polyester. The microfiber sample from the cluster was compared to the sealed sample from Madison's old car mat. When the two samples were placed side by side, the IR absorption spectra matched almost perfectly, from polymer type, wear level, to oxidation signs from cleaning chemical exposure. This meant Evan's clothing had direct contact with Madison's car mat at the time of the murder or immediately after. This was no longer speculation. This was direct evidence. The presence of microfiber on Evan's collar suggested two possibilities. One, Evan was pressed down onto the car floor. Two, Evan's body was dragged or placed on the car floor before transport to Williamson Forest. The lead investigator read the report and said a chilling sentence. "We're no longer facing suspicion. We're facing body transportation." The forensic specialists continued, by examining the nylon cord recovered from the scene. The cord fibers were analyzed via Raman spectroscopy, and although it couldn't be confirmed as the exact strangulation weapon, its chemical composition was compatible with household and automotive tie-down cords from 2010, especially strap sets sold for sedans. The nylon cord appearing beside the body and microfiber on Evan's shirt made the body transported by vehicle hypothesis extremely clear. The cold case unit reviewed 2010 photos of Madison's vehicle. The brand new mats, absolutely clean, were now seen differently, not coincidentally replaced, but highly likely replaced to erase traces. Especially, the old mat microfiber still remaining on Evan's collar showed Madison replaced the mats after the body contacted the old mat, but before the vehicle was inspected. This established a critical timeline. Madison must have replaced the mats within hours to a day after Evan's death, meaning she knew what happened and attempted immediate trace concealment. When synthesizing all new forensic results, the cold case unit compiled a reanalysis file. Madison's car mat contained plant spores matching 96% with spores at SE11 body recovery site. Microfiber from Madison's car mat appeared on Evan's collar. Microfiber on clothing perfectly matched the old mat sample Madison replaced immediately after the incident. Nylon fibers at the scene matched the chemical profile of household nylon cord, consistent with the method of killing. No legitimate reason for such deep contact between the car mat and Evan's clothing. The forensic report concluded, there is a very high probability the victim's body was transported in Madison Carter's vehicle at or immediately after time of death. This was the final piece shattering Madison's entire 2010 story. No longer skewed statements, no longer guesses, no longer data gaps. Forensics cold, physical evidence impossible to manipulate by memory or emotion, had pointed to what all prior data was leading toward. Madison Carter removed Evan Ridley from the apartment. Not that he walked out, not that he went for a stroll, not that he vanished, she took him. By car. And with that truth, the case no longer had a way back to the starting point. It moved fully into the phase of prosecuting the killer. Immediately after the analysis of physical evidence indicated that Evan Ridley's body had most likely been transported in Madison Carter's vehicle, the cold case unit moved to the next step, reconstructing Madison's entire route on the night of October 12, 2010, using technology that did not exist at the time. They combined blurry 2010 camera footage, Franklin Williamson traffic maps, and AI vehicle shape recognition algorithms to trace every possible movement between 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock p.m., the time frame in which the concealment of the body most likely occurred, according to forensic reasoning. This began with the single frame captured at 9:04 p.m. at the entrance to Cool Springs Galleria, where a dark-colored sedan appeared, driving steadily, with only one person in the driver's seat. In 2010, the cameras were of such low quality that license plates could not be read or the exact shade of the vehicle distinguished, but in 2021, AI software could analyze the geometric ratios of the front end, light structures, roof angle, and light reflections. When the cold case unit fed the video into the system, the AI determined an 87% probability that the vehicle in the footage was the sedan model Madison was using at the time. Though not considered absolute identification evidence, this match rate was many times higher than for similar vehicles appearing in the area during the same time frame. As the vehicle's route was reverse analyzed, the cold case unit created a map of the roads the sedan could have taken after the 9:04 p.m. marker. Traffic analysis from that year, based on traffic light timings and route lengths, showed if the vehicle in the footage left Cool Springs Galleria at 9:04 p.m. heading north or east, it would have been captured by one of the other traffic cameras on the same axis. But no matching images appeared between 9:05 and 9:20 p.m. This eliminated two directions. If the vehicle turned south onto Mallory Lane, heading toward Brentwood, it would have passed a security camera at the Mallory Plaza commercial complex. That camera still retained 2010 data, but recorded no similar sedan. This possibility, was also eliminated. The westward direction, back toward the minor roads leading into the Williamson Forest area, which had no cameras in 2010, became the only route not ruled out. The cold case unit built a probability heat map and discovered that the western route was the only one that night, with enough time window for the vehicle to leave the Galleria, reach the forest edge, stop, and return to Franklin or Brentwood without passing any cameras. This proved nothing, but it matched, dangerously perfectly, with the forensics. The body was found right along the western route. With this data, the analysis team expanded their search for video from smaller commercial establishments along the western route, including an old convenience store, a church with parking lot cameras, and a farm equipment repair shop. Many videos had long been overwritten, but 2 devices using analog DVR systems still had original tapes that had not been destroyed. One of them, the rear camera of St. Roderick Church, captured a blurry segment at 9:42 p.m., the shadow of a dark-colored sedan passing along the dirt road behind the church, heading toward the Williamson Forest area. The image was very blurry, with no visible license plate, but the shadow length of the vehicle, body height, and taillight distribution closely matched the model Madison drove in 2010. The AI assessed a 72% similarity, not enough to conclude, but enough to raise questions. Why did a vehicle with characteristics matching Madison's appear exactly on the route leading into the forest, exactly within the time frame forensics estimated the body could have been transported? As the map was further built out to 10 p.m., the cold case unit found a second video segment from the camera of a tool store about a mile from the forest edge. The footage, recorded at 10:05 p.m., showed a dark-colored sedan emerging from the forest direction, with low-beam headlights on, moving unusually slowly at about 20 miles per hour, despite no other vehicles on the road. The AI evaluated the probability of matching Madison's vehicle model at 69%, still not identifiable, but worth placing alongside the 9:42 p.m. segment. The 2 frames were more than 20 minutes apart, on the same quiet route directly connecting to the S11 area where Evan's body was found. A GIS technician added another layer of analysis. The average speed of the vehicle between the 2 points at 9:42 and 10:05 p.m., if it was the same vehicle, was only about 49%, meaning the vehicle had stopped for at least 10-15 minutes in the forest or an area without cameras. This stop duration matched remarkably with the time needed to drag, position, and preliminarily bury a body in the dark, which forensics confirmed was not deep, but showed signs of being dug with a small tool. When combined with the microfibers from Madison's car carpet matching fibers on Evan's shirt and forest spores on the car carpet, the timeline model became clearer. 9:04 p.m., vehicle leaves the Galleria area. 9:42 p.m., vehicle appears near the entrance to Williamson Forest. 9:42, 10 p.m. Vehicle stops in an area without cameras. 10:05 p.m., vehicle leaves the forest, heading toward Franklin. For the first time in 11 years, the route of Evan walking out the back door and disappearing was replaced by a logically consistent route supported by digital evidence and forensics. Madison leaves the apartment, drives with the body, stops at Williamson Forest, leaves the body and returns. To reinforce this, the cold case unit used an AI motion signature model to analyze the vehicle's movement characteristics in both video segments. Despite the blurry images, the system detected small oscillation points when turning, oscillations dependent on suspension stiffness and weight distribution. The results matched the characteristics of the 2007 sedan Madison used, with only a 6% error margin. No legal conclusion came from this analysis, but it indicated a high probability that the same vehicle appeared at both locations. When all data layers were overlaid, camera, AI, GIS, forensics, the cold case unit noted in the report, Madison Carter's vehicle most likely traveled to the Williamson Forest area between 9:40 and 10:05 p.m. on October 12, 2010, consistent with the time and location where Evan Ridley's body was buried. One final sentence was added after the team re-examined the entire route. There is no reasonable explanation for the vehicle's presence at that location other than the possibility of transporting the body. With the vehicle's route reconstructed, the case picture was no longer just a series of contradictions, it became a clear journey leading straight from the Franklin apartment to the ESA-11 burial site. Madison Carter was not just the central suspect, she was the only person with the opportunity, means and route that perfectly matched every forensic data point in the case. The 2021 interrogation of Madison Carter was scheduled immediately after the cold case unit completed the vehicle route analysis and reconstruction of the body transport, this time not exploratory, but a formal, recorded session with witnesses and a clear objective to test the consistency of her statements against the chain of interconnected evidence the team had built. When Madison entered the small interrogation room at Franklin PD, she no longer displayed the timid anxiety of 2010. She appeared calm, almost confident, setting her purse on the table, adjusting her hair, then smiling mechanically at the two investigators. Investigator Reese began with a gentle tone, an old technique they knew well how Madison responded to. The more relaxed they seemed, the more she talked. And as predicted, after just 3 opening questions, Madison began pouring out a long stream of narrative, with the familiar rhythm the cold case unit had reviewed dozens of times in the 2010 recordings, fast-paced voice, mixed emotions, sometimes emphasizing unasked details. "I know you all think I'm involved, but I was just trying to calm Evan down, we argued, but not the kind of argument you think. I left to give him space." The investigators did not interrupt. They let her talk. And the more she talked, the more she slipped into contradictions. The second investigator, Hale, opened his laptop, displaying the reconstructed timeline with 3 data layers: cell tower anomaly, laptop shutdown time, and the 9:04 p.m. camera. "Madison," he said slowly, "we want you to explain that night again, precisely, from 8:20 until you left the apartment." She nodded quickly. "I arrived around 8 p.m., maybe earlier, I don't remember exactly. We talked for a while, then I left." This was a major contradiction with her 2010 statement, and she had just inadvertently confirmed misremembering a key detail. Hale continued. "What time did you leave the apartment?" She answered immediately. Without thinking, around 8:50, close to 9. This directly contradicted the 9:04 p.m. vehicle camera and her prior 2021 statement that she left much earlier. When Reese gently pointed out the discrepancy, Madison immediately adjusted. "Maybe I misread the clock. I'm not sure, but I remember leaving early." The two investigators exchanged glances. This was the exact pattern from 2010. The more scrutinized, the more Madison bent the story to evade responsibility, inadvertently creating new layers of contradiction. They continued. This time with leading questions. "Did you go anywhere after leaving the apartment?" Madison smirked, an uncontrolled reaction the team had been waiting for. "I went back to Brentwood, like I've said for 10 years. If the interrogation had ended there, this answer might still seem reasonable. But Reese opened a folder of photos, the 2 blurry frames from 9:42 p.m. and 10:05 p.m. on the Williamson Forest route. He placed them in front of Madison. "Do you recognize this vehicle?" Madison looked at the images, frowning. "No, no way. My car wasn't there." Reese left the images for a few seconds, then turned the screen to the AI analysis, showing 72% and 69% match probabilities. Clearly not absolute evidence, but enough to make Madison suddenly tense. She pressed her hand to her forehead. I don't understand. That night I didn't go into the forest. I'm scared of the forest. I don't know the way there." But this immediately contradicted her own 2021 statement, where she described the forest as low-lying and dark, a detail only someone who had been there could know. Hale leaned forward. "Madison, you say you don't know the way, but in last week's statement, You described the terrain where the remains were found very accurately. Can you explain that? Madison blinked rapidly, then changed tone. I guessed. Evan once told me about that forest. This was the first moment in the interrogation that both investigators noted simultaneously. Evan had never mentioned the forest in any messages, emails, or witness statements. That information did not exist outside Madison's words, and she had just created a completely new detail contrary to all 11 years of data. Reese continued the soft attack. Madison, we have forensic evidence showing Evan's body was transported using your car carpet. Microfibers from your old car carpet appeared on his shirt collar. How do you explain this? Madison's face went pale. This was the moment in the internal behavioral psychology file called the control breakdown point, when the suspect knows they no longer control the narrative. Madison spoke quickly and frantically. No way. Evan, he had sat in my car. Hale responded immediately. He had not sat in your car in the week before the disappearance. That's confirmed by friends, GPS routes, and parking lot cameras. And even if he had, microfibers couldn't adhere to the collar the way we found them, unless there was strong contact with the carpet. Madison spoke faster, more disjointedly. Maybe I drove him sometime that I forgot. I don't remember everything. At this point, she began pouring out words identical to the pattern in the 2012 Shayna interrogation video. Talking a lot to fill gaps, bending sentences, raising her voice on parts she wanted believed, and sometimes contradicting herself in one sentence. Reese did not stop. Madison, that night, Evan's phone recorded an anomaly showing someone carried it near the back door. You were the only one there. Can you explain that? Madison, now completely losing control of her breathing, responded with a statement that made the entire team exchange glances instantly. I just brought the phone near the door to see if he really went outside. This statement destroyed her entire 2010 version, where she insisted Evan walked out the back himself. It also perfectly matched the cell tower anomaly data, details Madison had never seen or known. Reese stopped writing. Looked up. You just said you held Evan's phone? Madison froze, then tried to correct. I don't remember. Hale and Reese exchanged looks. That was the first unintentional admission, a slip, a critical connection, and not the only one in the interrogation. A few minutes later, when asked why she replaced her car carpet within 48 hours of the disappearance, Madison answered, I spilled coffee in the car. But forensics confirmed no coffee stains on the carpet, only organic cleaner and manually cut fiber samples, perfectly matching evidence removal. She continued. I don't know. I don't remember. I was just scared of being blamed. Reese stepped out, returned with the vehicle route analysis file. Madison, help us understand why was your car near Williamson Woods at 9:42 p.m.? Madison suddenly burst into tears, voice higher than controlled. I didn't mean to. I just drove around. I needed to think. This was the second black mark, she admitted, being in the forest area at the exact camera time frame. Both her 2010 and 2021 statements denied this. Hale closed the file, said directly. Madison, we're no longer in the questioning phase, we're assessing probable cause. Madison looked up, tears flowing, but voice unevenly shaking. I didn't kill Evan, I swear. Reese replied evenly. We're not asking if you killed him. We're asking if you're telling the truth. Madison no longer answered. She looked down at the table, hands clenched, shoulders hunched. The video captured that moment as the final connecting line between her fractured statements and the irreversible forensic evidence. When the interrogation ended, Hale and Reese stepped out, closing the door. The cold case team lead asked only one question. Enough? Hale replied. More than enough. And for the first time in 11 years, the answer was not speculation but legal. There was probable cause to seek an arrest warrant for Madison Carter on charges of first-degree murder and concealing a body. On September 18, 2021, The arrest warrant was approved by the Williamson County Court after the prosecutor's office reviewed the full report, including forensics, vehicle route reconstruction, cell tower analysis, microfiber evidence, and Madison Carter's final interrogation transcript. At 6:40 a.m., two Franklin PD investigators coordinated with U.S. Marshals and Knoxville PD to approach the apartment complex where Madison was temporarily living while working at a private counseling center. The sky in Knoxville that day was overcast, with low, heavy clouds, and the early morning light slanted through the third-floor hallway where Madison's quiet apartment 3B sat, unaware that in just minutes it would become the scene of a new phase in a case spanning over a decade. When the lead officer knocked firmly 3 times on the door, his voice rang clear. "Madison Carter, this is Knoxville Police coordinating with Franklin PD. We have an arrest warrant." Inside, a faint sound emerged, the shifting of an object, perhaps a chair or purse. About 3 seconds of silence passed before Madison opened the door, her face showing a mix of just woken and terrified, as if she had expected this, but still hoped it wouldn't come. She saw the 6 officers in the warrant clearly printed with homicide, and the collapse in her eyes happened almost instantly. An officer read the warrant again. "Madison Carter, you are under arrest for first-degree murder, transportation and concealment of a body, and providing false statements during an investigation." As the handcuffs clicked shut, Madison did not resist, only trembled slightly and looked down at the floor, exactly like her demeanor when her 2010 statements were challenged. The only difference this time was that there was no longer a chance to adjust the story. Every piece of evidence had been assembled into a complete, inseparable structure. She was led down the stairs, past the parking lot, where 2 patrol cars waited. A few residents peeked from behind curtains, watching through slits, unsure exactly what was happening, only seeing a young woman being escorted away surrounded by police. That image quickly spread on Knoxville social media a few hours later, once her name was confirmed in the Franklin PD release. In the car, Madison was completely silent. She rested her head against the window, eyes wide open but unfocused on anything, as if every effort to keep her story intact over 11 years had collapsed in a few forensic conclusions. An officer noted that she opened her mouth several times as if to say something, but then fell silent, only swallowing dryly and staring straight ahead. The drive from Knoxville to Williamson County Jail took over 2 hours, and throughout the trip, Madison did not say a word. When the convoy arrived in Franklin, media was already waiting, even though Franklin PD had not announced the transfer time. The arrest news spread too fast. A disappearance case from 2010, body found after 11 years, suspect the ex-girlfriend. Those elements drew media like a magnet. Officers had to bring Madison in through the back entrance to avoid cameras and the crowd. At Williamson County Jail, intake procedures were followed exactly: mugshot, fingerprints, health check, and transfer to medium security holding. The Williamson County prosecutor, that same afternoon, held a brief meeting with Franklin PD to review prosecution steps. Based on what had been gathered, the file was relabeled from cold case, homicide, to active prosecution file. Madison Carter, once viewed only as a contradictory witness, now officially became the defendant in the murder of Evan Ridley. By the end of the day, the prosecutor signed the order to forward the case to the grand jury. The only thing remaining was the initial hearing, where Madison would hear the full indictment, and where the Franklin community would for the first time confront the truth as it had emerged. The mysterious 2010 disappearance was no longer a mystery, but a sophisticated murder concealed for over a decade before the silence of Williamson Forest was broken. Immediately after Madison Carter's arrest and the official case file being transferred to the prosecution phase, the Williamson County prosecutor requested a series of additional pre-trial forensics to strengthen the entire structure of the charges before presenting the case to the grand jury. This is a step that, in reopened cold cases, often becomes the dividing line between a strong case and one that cannot hold up in court. For the Evan Ridley case, investigators, forensic experts, GIS specialists, and soil analysis experts were mobilized simultaneously to reconstruct the crime sequence with maximum detail. 4 areas were focused on the nylon cord, soil and wood samples from the scene, biostratigraphic analysis, and death time reconstruction. First was the ash-colored nylon cord found right next to the remains. During the initial excavation phase, the cord was only described as suspicious, but there was not enough evidence to confirm its role in Evans' death. The new examination used micrometric tensile analysis and scanning electron microscopy, SEM, to inspect fiber deformation. The results showed parallel abrasion marks on the nylon fiber surface, forming a compressed abrasion pattern characteristic of a cord being tightened around a soft object with low resistance, such as human skin around the neck. Notably, the fiber section near the knot contained short microcracks in the direction of applied force, fully consistent with continuous tightening without jerking. When the deformation sample was compared to the injury patterns on Evans' hyoid bone and thyroid cartilage, the forensic expert concluded the tightening mechanism and nylon fiber deformation matched the force causing the neck bone injuries in the victim. The nylon cord was not just present next to the body, it bore traces of the actual act of killing. Next were the soil, spores, and wood microfragments taken from position SE11 and compared to samples collected from Evans' clothing. This analysis was more extensive than in the 2021 phase, including lignin signature, the decomposition pattern of lignin at different stages. When applied to the humus layer stuck to Evans' collar and shoulders, the lab detected a 93% match in lignin pattern with the decayed wood of the red maple at S11. This proved that Evans' body had direct contact with the ground at the burial site rather than being brought from elsewhere. Furthermore, the microscopic decomposition in the soil on the clothing differed from soil collected near Evans' apartment, completely ruling out the hypothesis that he fell to the ground elsewhere before being moved. The growth ring analysis unit discovered a small 4 mm wood fragment lodged in the shoulder seam of Evans' shirt. This wood piece was cut unnaturally, not broken by footsteps, but showing signs of contact with a small metal blade, possibly from a shovel or digging tool. When compared to branch and root samples from the scene, the cut marks matched a common retail mini-steel shovel from 2010. This indirectly reinforced the assessment that the perpetrator dug a shallow grave using a small tool, not machinery. The most critical part of the additional forensics was the TOD reconstruction, reconstructing the time of death. This was a central factor because it helped determine whether Evan died while Madison was still at the apartment or after she left. In a long decomposed body, TOD is often hard to pinpoint, but forensics combined multiple indicators: 1 bone injuries, 2 cell tower anomaly data, 3 laptop shutdown time, 4 soil and bone decomposition characteristics, 5 environmental temperature in Franklin on the night of October 12, 2010. By simulating the early decomposition stage using the Vas-Migiesi formula and cross-referencing with nitrogen levels in the soil around the hyoid bone position, forensics determined that the body was buried within 4 hours after death. In parallel, microvascular retraction signs in the laryngeal bone, a little-known indicator, showed that Evan died while his body was at normal temperature, meaning death occurred shortly after 8:21 p.m., the time of his last message. When combined with fracture traces and thyroid cartilage condition, the expert team provided an unprecedented narrow time of death window in the case, 9:20–9:40 p.m. on October 12, 2010. This TOD frame aligned perfectly with 3 key data points. Madison was still at the apartment according to her 2010 statement. Evans' laptop shut down at 9:08 p.m., indicating coercive action possibly occurring just before or after. Surveillance camera captured the suspect vehicle at 9:42 p.m., heading toward Williamson Forest, just minutes after TOD. The pre-trial forensic report concluded, there is no reasonable scenario in which Madison Carter left the apartment before the fatal act occurred. The before, during, after data all align with the perpetrator being present in the apartment throughout the crime. When the entire investigation team read the final conclusion, the time of death 9:20–9:40 p.m., no one said a word. This was the final piece completing the entire logical chain. Madison was there. Evan died in that window. The body left the house shortly after. The car entered the forest at 9:42 p.m. At this point, the case no longer relied on inference, but on multi-layered indisputable forensics. And with that, the Williamson County prosecutor had a solid legal foundation to prepare for taking the Evan Ridley case to trial. The trial of Madison Carter took place in December 2021 at the Williamson County Courthouse, in the largest courtroom in the building. A venue that had witnessed many serious cases, but few carried a decade of silence, a body buried for 11 years, and a suspect once seen only as the last witness. The courthouse hallway on the first morning was packed with reporters, but inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was thick, tense, and no one spoke louder than a breath. The entire Franklin community had been waiting for this moment, the first time the full timeline from the evening of October 12, 2010 to February 2021 would be reconstructed with forensic evidence, digital data, and Madison's contradictory statements. The prosecutor stepped forward first, opening the trial with a statement printed in most news articles that day. Evan Ridley did not disappear. Evan Ridley was killed, and the evidence will show you who was there, who lied, and who took his body into the woods. On the large screen behind, the 11-year timeline was divided into 3 layers: 1 digital evidence, 2 forensic physical evidence, and 3 Madison Carter's 2010-2021 statements. When the prosecutor replayed the 9:04 p.m. video from 2010, the dark sedan gliding through the blurry frame, the courtroom fell dead silent. This was a moment that meant nothing in 2010, but with 2021 forensics, it became a near-certain timestamp proving Madison left the apartment right after Evan's death. The prosecutor presented the timeline with a rhythm precise enough to feel like slow-motion footage. 8:21 p.m. Evan sent his last message. 8:40, 8:57 p.m. Cell tower anomaly showing the phone moved near the back door. 9:08 p.m. Laptop shut down abruptly. 9:20, 9:40 p.m. Forensics determined time of death. 9:42 p.m. Madison's suspect vehicle appeared near Williamson Woods. 10:05 p.m. Vehicle seen leaving the woods. Each marker was projected on the large screen, color-coded red for forensic, blue for digital, and yellow for statements. When the complete timeline was displayed, the jury saw not a chain of hypotheses, but a continuous logical structure with no gaps large enough for an innocent narrative. The prosecutor called the first witness, the neck-bone forensic expert, who explained in a calm, cold voice that the compressive hyoid fracture was almost certainly indicative of ligature strangulation. Not a fall, not suicide, not an accident. Madison looked down as the expert described how the nylon cord cut into soft tissue, causing loss of consciousness in just 8:20 seconds. Then the prosecutor called the microfiber analysis expert to the stand. The expert held the fiber sample in a test tube, enunciating clearly, "This fiber matches exactly the sample from Madison Carter's car carpet, not just the polymer type, but the oxidation level, a process that cannot be replicated without direct contact." This statement caused a few sharp breaths in the gallery. The truth now had physical form, car carpet fibers on Evan's collar, dragging along the entire 11-year structure of deception. By late morning, the GIS specialist presented the map of 12 suspect points, emphasizing S11, the burial site. When the overlaid satellite data from 2009-2014 was shown, all eyes focused on the depression, brighter than the surrounding forest. The expert said, "No natural phenomenon created that soil disturbance pattern exactly in October, November 2010. When he pointed out that Madison's 2021 statement described the area identically to the undisclosed burial site, a low murmur spread through the jury box. An investigator whispered to the prosecutor, "That's the heaviest psychological blow." Then came the statement cross-examination. The prosecutor projected large-screen footage of 21-year-old Madison in her 2010 interrogation, talking non-stop, shifting tone, forcing smiles, repeating, "I don't remember," over 17 times in the first 30 minutes. Right beside it, a split screen showed her 2021 statement, avoiding eye contact, saying, "I guess, I forgot. I just wanted to calm him down." Her voice patterns overlapped in tone, speed, and avoidance tactics. The court psychologist, called by the prosecution, analyzed Madison's behavior. This is a typical pattern of responsibility minimization. When faced with new evidence, she adjusts her statement to fit what she thinks police already know. This is a very typical sign of someone concealing information. The jury nodded visibly. But the most pivotal moment of the trial occurred when the prosecutor played the full 2021 interrogation video of Madison for the jury. On screen, Madison said quickly and confusedly, "I just brought the phone near the door to see if he really left." That statement, an unintentional slip, tore through the 11-year fabric of her story like a needle. The prosecutor paused the video, looking directly at the jury. This is something she never said in 2010. And it matches perfectly with the cell tower anomaly. The courtroom froze for seconds. In the corner, Madison sat still, hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the floor, meeting no one's gaze. But it wasn't just her words that made her a mirror image of Shayna Hoover's. It was her courtroom behavior. Every time the prosecution presented forensic evidence, she smirked faintly. When the 9:04 p.m. camera video was replayed for the third time, she pressed her lips as if to object but stopped midway. When the expert described Evan's neck bones strangled by nylon cord, she rolled her eyes toward the jury in what courtroom psychology calls deflection gaze. When the 9:42 p.m. vehicle road evidence was shown, she leaned back with arms behind the chair, tilting her head as if unconcerned. All of it was noted and analyzed that same afternoon by the prosecution's behavior expert. This is a pattern of responsibility avoidance and performative emotional response. When cornered, she chooses expressive reactions over logical ones. This reinforces that she changed her statements due to confronting evidence, not hazy memory. When the prosecutor summarized the entire case at the end of the day, every forensic and digital piece had been assembled into a complete structure. Evan died in the home. Madison was there. She held the phone to the back door. Laptop shut down. Body transported by car. Car appeared in the woods at the exact time. Car carpet contained forest spores, and Madison described the undisclosed scene. The prosecutor closed with a statement that left the courtroom breathless. If not Madison Carter, then who? And if she didn't do it, why does every piece of evidence point straight to her from the very first minute? In the jury box, no one shifted or looked away. For the first time in 11 years, the Evan Ridley case was no longer an invisible void. It became a seamless story, sequential, forensic-backed, with one person standing at the center of everything that happened on the night of October 12, 2010. And that person was sitting in the middle of the trial. The next afternoon at 4:12, the jury returned to the courtroom, carrying the sealed verdict that Franklin and the Ridley family had waited over a decade for. Madison Carter sat motionless, hands on the table, knuckles white as if strength had long left her body. When the judge asked her to stand for the verdict, Madison took a very shallow breath, eyes straight ahead but completely unfocused. The foreperson opened the envelope, his voice clear in the silent room. "We, the jury of Williamson County, find the defendant Madison Carter guilty of second-degree murder, guilty of abuse of a corpse." A choked sob escaped from the Ridley family's row, not a wail of collapse, but one of release, the sound of a long journey reaching its end. Madison closed her eyes for 2 seconds, then opened them, staring blankly. Not the look of someone shocked, but of someone who knew the layers of stories she had built, adjusted and held for 11 years, could no longer hold. The prosecutor bowed his head once, without smiling or sighing. He had seen too many cases to be naive about victory emotions. The defense attorney placed a hand on Madison's shoulder, but she did not respond. Her body was rigid like stone in a blizzard. After 20 minutes explaining the verdict, the judge moved to sentencing, a phase always difficult in cold case murders, as the long delay makes the sentence symbolic of both justice and delay. He looked directly at Madison. "Miss Carter, the evidence presented shows you took the life of Evan Ridley, then attempted to conceal it by transporting and burying the body. This act not only caused immeasurable harm to the victim's family, but delayed justice for over a decade." The courtroom was so quiet the turning of pages could be heard. Therefore, the court sentences 40 years imprisonment for second-degree murder, 10 years imprisonment for abuse of a corpse. The sentences will run concurrently, for a total of 40 years under Tennessee law. No one in the room was surprised. The prosecution had requested 50 years. Defense had pushed for 25. But the 40-year sentence reflected the strength of forensic clues, body concealment, and the prolonged deception. Madison stumbled a step when the bailiff touched her elbow, as if her body finally registered the weight of the sentence her mind had not yet processed. As she was led away, she turned once, not to the Ridley family, not to the prosecutor, not to the judge, but straight to the large screen where the timeline had been displayed all week. The images of 8:21 p.m., 9:08 p.m., 9:42 p.m., the timeline she had tried to bend for 11 years now, stood as the bare skeleton of truth. After Madison was removed from the courtroom, the judge declared, "With this sentence, the Evan Ridley case is considered fully resolved." No one clapped, no one cheered. Some bowed their heads in prayer. Some looked at the ceiling as if wanting to say something to the space. The Ridley family hugged, crying softly, not from triumph, but because they finally knew exactly what happened to their son that night. There was cruelty, deception, concealment, but also truth. And the truth, after 11 years, had finally been spoken. The prosecutor walked out of the courthouse in the late afternoon. The Tennessee sunlight, thick and long on the pavement, as if the whole town was slowly exhaling after holding its breath too long. The Evan Ridley case, one of Franklin's most mysterious disappearances, had closed. No longer an unfinished story, no longer a question mark, no longer the haunting of Williamson Woods. It became a sentence, a line in the records, case closed, 11 years after disappearance. And with that, Franklin was finally returned its silence. But the silence of closure, not of unsolved loss. When the 40-year sentence was handed down, and the Evan Ridley file was officially closed after 11 years, the cold case unit spent weeks compiling the entire investigation process, not to write a victory report, but to answer the most important question every veteran investigator asks: why did the case fail in 2010, and why was it solved in 2021? The summary report acknowledged a hard truth. The initial investigation did not fail due to lack of effort or skill, but due to lacking technologies that either did not exist or were not deployed at the local level at that time. In 2010, Franklin PD did the best they could with the technology available, checked the apartment perimeter, collected phone data, reviewed cameras, deployed SAR, and searched the forest within feasible radius. But each investigative loop hit an invisible limit. Limitation 1. Low-quality cameras. Commercial cameras in 2010 had resolution too poor to identify plates, people and vehicles, or distinguish same-color cars. The 9:04 p.m. video, later one of the most pivotal pieces of evidence, in 2010, was just an anonymous vehicle shadow, worthless. In 2021, AI could analyze geometry ratios, light brightness, even body oscillation, to determine over 70% match with Madison's car. Limitation 2. Raw cell tower logs. 2010 logs only recorded, connected or idle. Metadata, unpacking technology, did not exist locally. Thus, the south-facing anomaly, the key showing Evan's phone moved to the back door, was completely missed. 10 years later, new signal deviation software revealed the phone moved in the 17 minutes before death. Limitation 3. Underdeveloped organic forensics. No one in 2010 could analyze plant spores, microfibers, or IR absorption spectrum of polyester fibers on the victim's collar. No one could match spores in Madison's car carpet to Williamson forest spores. No one detected old car carpet microfibers transferred to Evan's shirt during body transport. All those techniques only became forensic standard after 2017. Limitation 4. GIS and satellite imagery. In 2010, Franklin PD had no access to medium-resolution yearly satellite photos, let alone terrain overlay software. Thus, the depression at SE11, where soil was disturbed and refilled, was invisible to the naked eye, and not on search maps. Only after 2014, with GIS upgrades and commercial satellite data availability, did the area reveal itself as a terrain anomaly. Limitation 5. No body. The biggest issue in 2010 was no Evan body. No body meant no strangulation evidence, no ligature marks, no bone analysis, no time of death, no transport signs. Investigation could only circle behavioral clues and phone timeline, all leading to suspicion but not probable cause. Limitation 6. Search warrant and evidence retention limits. Madison's car could not be held in 2010 due to no blood, no evidence, no injuries. If spore or microfiber analysis existed then, the carpet sample would have sufficed for retention and immediate comparison. But in 2010, the carpet was returned, and Madison replaced it. A key piece of evidence was literally erased because forensic technology lagged. The summary report stated concisely, the case did not fail due to procedural errors. The case failed because of the era. But precisely because technology changed over 11 years, the case was solved. Why did 2021 forensics crack it? The cold case unit listed 4 breakthrough factors. 1. Modern DNA technology. DNA from Evan's marrow buried 11 years was nearly perfectly matched using new generation STR and degraded sample processing, impossible for 2010 labs. 2. GIS plus multi-year satellite imagery. Terrain overlay, shadow analysis, and soil change detection found the burial site, SAR 2010 completely missed. 3. Soil and pollen forensics. Williamson forest spores on Madison's car carpet, and red maple root wood fragments in Evan's shirt seam, physical evidence inexplicable by coincidence. 4. Comprehensive digital reconstruction. AI vehicle motion analysis, cell tower anomaly cross-reference, laptop timeline, blurry camera, all combined into consistent data chain. Madison's car appeared near the burial site, exactly when forensics determined the body was transported. The operational lessons for future cold cases drawn in the final report. Cold cases never die, they only sleep. Future technology can always solve what current humans cannot. Evidence retention is key. The 6 by 8 centimeters carpet piece deemed worthless in 2010 became the strongest evidence in 2021. Never overlook small anomalies. 3 phone logs once seen as noise were the first sign of body dragging. Never underestimate environmental data. Soil, spores, wood lignin, ground depression, all remember longer than people. Cases should be re-examined every 3-5 years as forensic technology advances. The Evan case clearly proves technology does not just assist investigation, it redefines truth. In the final line of the summary report, the cold case team leader wrote, "The Evan Ridley case shows the silence of a disappearance is never forever. Technology will eventually force the truth to speak." And because of that, the file was closed, not by time, but by justice finding its voice after 11 years buried under Williamson forest soil. The story of the Evan Ridley case, a man who vanished in 2010 and was only found after 11 years thanks to modern forensic technology, reflects an important reality of American life today. We live in a society where technology, digital data, and personal transparency are increasingly tied to safety and justice, yet also one where intimate partner violence can occur silently, beyond the observation of friends and community. The case shows Evan had no signs of wanting to leave his life, stable job in Nashville, no unusual financial activity, even his daily routine unchanged before 8:21 p.m. that day. This reminds us that in the United States, where many live independently and self-sufficiently, Maintaining connections with family, friends, and colleagues is essential for detecting abnormalities early. In the case, it was the Nashville office's attention when Evan did not arrive on time as usual. That was the first red flag. The story also highlights the importance of recording information, preserving evidence, and trusting law enforcement, even when results do not come immediately. In 2010, Madison's car carpet was seen as worthless, but 11 years later, the microfibers from it solved the case. This reflects the U.S. legal system, though sometimes slow and limited by technology, persistence and proper storage can create turning points after many years. And the most costly lesson lies in Madison's behavior. She was not a dangerous stranger, but the person closest to Evan. This is the reality America still faces. Intimate partner violence accounts for a large portion of serious crimes. The story reminds us to watch for signs of control, ongoing conflict, inconsistent statements, like Madison repeatedly changing her timeline, and not to dismiss abnormal signals in relationships. Technology helps uncover truth, but vigilance, connection, and human understanding are what prevent tragic outcomes from happening in the first place. Thank you for following this 11-year case-solving journey. If you appreciate stories where justice finally speaks, please subscribe so you don't miss the next cases. See you in the next video, where we continue exploring how the truth always finds its way back.